In the quiet darkness of a modern bedroom, everything seems ordinary. Soft sheets, a pillow gently cradling the head, the quiet hum of a world outside that is unknowingly waiting to wake. But beneath the surface, something ancient stirs. Imagine the scene transforming. The bedroom melts away, and instead, you are now standing in the dim, flickering light of an ancient Egyptian chamber 3,500 years ago. A priest lies on a stone slab, his body surrounded by carefully arranged amulets and the deep, enigmatic symbols of hieroglyphs. The air is thick with incense, and soft chanting echoes from the walls. This isn't just sleep, this is something far deeper. The priest, eyes half lidded, is preparing himself for the most sacred of rituals, what we would call sleep, but for him it is a perilous journey that could very well be his last. His preparations don't look like the casual surrender we take for granted each night. Instead, they resemble a rite of passage, one that looks strikingly similar to how we prepare the dead for burial. Sleep, for the Egyptians, was never something to be taken lightly. It wasn't just the body's rest, as we might believe today. It was death, an interruption of life, a brief crossing into the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that each night, as the body closed its eyes, the soul embarked on a journey through realms of gods and demons, where cosmic forces shaped its fate. The very moment the body rested, it teetered between life and death, with the soul slipping away, vulnerable and lost in a world of shadows. It was a journey where, without the proper spells and protection, the soul could be lost forever. We might close our eyes every night, thinking nothing of it, but the Egyptians were different. They knew that without the right prayers, the right charms, and the proper guidance, that journey could lead to something far darker than mere sleep. This ritual was not something trivial, it was a matter of life and death, with sleep spells placed alongside death spells in tombs, marking their belief that the boundary between the two was not as clear as we think. The act of closing the eyes and surrendering to sleep wasn't simply an act of resting. It was, in their eyes, a death, a small one, yet a death all the same, and the fight to return to life, to be reborn with the dawn, was as real as any battle against the forces of darkness. What's more curious is that this wasn't metaphorical. To the Egyptians, this was literal. Every single night, they believed, you died a small death and fought to be reborn. But what if there's more to it? What if they were right? What if, when we close our eyes, we not simply resting, but dying? A question emerges, one that echoes in the quiet chambers of history. What did the Egyptians believe was actually happening to your soul during those mysterious hours of darkness? For the ancient Egyptians, sleep was not a peaceful rest. It was a perilous journey, fraught with dangers far beyond our understanding. They didn't fear the things we associate with nightmares, like monsters under the bed or ghosts in the closet. No, they feared something far more intimate, far more personal. They feared that, when they closed their eyes, their soul would leave their body and never return. Sleep was a temporary death, a separation of the body from its life force. And in that moment of vulnerability, the world became a dangerous place. Archaeological evidence underscores just how seriously the Egyptians took this fear. Amulets, often placed on pillows, were thought to offer protection during sleep, as though their physical presence could ward off malevolent forces. Headrests were inscribed with protective spells, and the words of those spells were recited before sleep, eerily resembling the last rites we might say for the dead. These prayers and rituals were not born out of superstition. They were born out of the Egyptians' belief in the fragility of the soul and the very real danger of its departure from the body. During these hours of darkness, their vulnerability was palpable. Malevolent entities, they believed, could strike at the soul while it was adrift, stealing fragments of it, or even preventing its return. This wasn't a metaphor for the dangers of the night. It was the very real fear that sleep could lead to death. One of the most prominent fears was the threat of Apophis, the serpent of chaos. Apophis was a god of destruction, a force so powerful that it threatened to devour the soul completely, leaving it lost in the duat, the underworld, forever. In the papyri, we find prayers that reveal the depth of this fear. Words like, "Let my soul not be taken," and "Let me wake at dawn" were recited with desperation, echoing across millennia, a testament to the anxiety felt every night. The Egyptians feared that in their vulnerable, unconscious state, they would be trapped in the duat, the dark realm of the dead, where their soul could forget the way back to the body and be consumed by the eternal darkness. This fear wasn't rooted in mere superstition. It was a logical extension of their cosmological beliefs. To the Egyptians, death wasn't an end, but a journey that required protection and guidance, much like the nightly journey of sleep. Sleep, with its stillness, its unconsciousness, and its temporary death, like quality, mirrored the very essence of their understanding of death itself. The soul was believed to leave the body during sleep, travelling through unknown realms, facing threats from gods and demons, and without the proper protection, the soul could become lost forever. No one could afford to take that risk. For the wealthy, this fear manifested in tangible ways. Some Egyptians hired dream priests, specialized figures whose job it was to help ensure that people survived their nightly sojourns. These priests would offer rituals, incantations, and protective magic to ensure that the soul was safe during sleep. People would pay handsomely for these services, desperate to avoid the terrible fate of an unprotected soul. In some cases, it wasn't enough. Archaeological evidence suggests that some Egyptians actually died in their sleep, anxious, fearful, their bodies succumbing to conditions like heart failure, brought on by the overwhelming terror of their own nightly journeys. These fears were not just imagined, they were so real they may have tragically become self-fulfilling prophecies. In this ancient world, sleep was far from the peaceful, restorative escape we take it to be. It was a dangerous liminal state where the soul was vulnerable, and death was not an abstract concept, but a very real threat that hovered in the darkness. And if sleep was so dangerous, then the Egyptians' fear makes perfect sense. They didn't fear monsters under the bed. They feared their soul wouldn't return to the bed at all. As we contemplate the danger that sleep represented, one question lingers in the air. If sleep was so treacherous, how did they protect themselves from these nightly threats? But before we explore the protective measures they took, we must first understand the most fundamental part of their belief system, the soul. What was it, and why did the Egyptians believe it was so susceptible to these dangers? When we think of death in ancient Egypt, we often imagine grand tombs and elaborate burial rituals. But what if I told you that the line between sleep and death was not as clear, cut as we might assume? The Egyptians themselves didn't distinguish between the two. In fact, their art, beautiful, precise, and filled with meaning, tells a story where sleep and death are not merely connected, but nearly identical. It was in the realm of art that this profound connection between death and sleep became clear. The same imagery used for the deceased was also used to depict those in the act of sleeping. Tomb paintings, for instance, often show figures lying horizontally, mirroring the pose of the dead. And above them, in both cases, a bird symbolizing the Ba, or soul, hovers, a sign of the soul's journey from the body, whether in sleep or in death. One particularly striking example comes from reliefs found in tombs, where the sleeping figures are surrounded by the same protective deities that guard the dead in their afterlife. These deities, often depicted in vigilant postures, stand ready to protect the soul from danger, whether it is resting or passed on to the underworld. And in the hieroglyphic inscriptions, the line between sleep and death becomes even more blurred. The symbols for both are interchangeable in many texts. The same signs used to denote the death of a person are also used for the sleep of a person, as though the act of resting was not merely a temporary suspension of life, but something far closer to the final cessation of it. This is no coincidence. In the Egyptian worldview, death was not an isolated event, it was a process, and sleep was simply one part of that process, a daily rehearsal for the soul's eventual journey into the afterlife. Perhaps the most striking evidence of this connection between sleep and death appears in the Foodie Book of the Dead, the famous funerary text that guided the deceased through their journey in the afterlife. The text describes the deceased's journey through the underworld, and if you compare it to descriptions found in medical papyri that detail dream journeys, the parallels are uncanny. Both describe journeys on boats, through rivers, meeting judges and encountering various gods and demons along the way. In both cases, the soul must undergo tests, challenges and encounters with powers far beyond the human realm. The Egyptians believed that, in sleep, the soul travelled on this same journey, only it was temporary, to be completed by morning. The imagery of sleep and death in Egyptian art thus mirrors one another, because the Egyptians saw them as the same journey, taken at different scales, one nightly, one final. This connection is made even clearer by the discovery of funerary beds found in tombs. At first glance, these appear to be nothing more than beds for the dead, the place where the body rests for eternity. However, closer examination reveals a shocking truth. These beds were often the same as the sleep beds used in life. In essence, the Egyptians practiced for death every single night, lying in the same position as the deceased, preparing their soul for the journey they would eventually take permanently. Their sleep was, in a very real sense, a rehearsal for death. Even the concept of awakening becomes part of this ritualized cyclical process. In tomb inscriptions, there are repeated prayers asking the deceased to awaken after their journey, just as household prayers echoed these same words, asking for the living to safely awaken from sleep. This mirrored awakening wasn't just a metaphorical wish for life to continue after death. It was a very real prayer for a safe return of the soul, whether it was the soul of the living or the soul of the dead. The Egyptians understood that life and death were part of a continuous cycle, and sleep was an essential, albeit temporary, part of that cycle. Perhaps most fascinating of all is the evidence that some Egyptians kept dream journals, filled with accounts of their nightly journeys. These journals read much like descriptions of the afterlife, blurring the lines between the two realms. What they dreamed of wasn't mere fantasy or idle thought. It was considered a genuine journey, one that traversed the same spiritual landscapes as the afterlife itself. Dreams weren't just echoes of the day. They were glimpses into the world of the gods, realms that, in the Egyptian cosmology, were as real as the world of the living. This all leads us to a revolutionary insight. Understanding Egyptian views on death is impossible without understanding their views on sleep. The two were not separate events in their lives. They were intimately connected, part of the same journey. Every night, the Egyptians crossed into realms they could not see, just as they would one day cross into the afterlife. For them, death wasn't a singular event that happened once. It was a process that began the moment they closed their eyes, and it was a journey they rehearsed every single night. Now that we've explored how Egyptian art and rituals entwined sleep and death, we must face a crucial question. If something was leaving the body each night and traveling to the same realms as the dead, what exactly was that? Something, the answer, as we'll discover, is not a simple one. The Egyptians didn't believe in a single soul. They believed in multiple parts, each with its own unique role in these nightly and final journeys. Understanding these soul parts is key to unraveling the mystery of what really happened during those dark hours when the Egyptians closed their eyes. Imagine, for a moment, that you aren't just one person, but 5 separate beings, each with its own mind, its own desires, and its own destination. Every night, when you close your eyes, these 5 components of your soul don't simply rest in unison. No, they each embark on their own journey, wandering through different realms. Each part has its own role to play, its own function, and its own needs. And while some of these parts stay close to your body, others wander far away, leaving you vulnerable to all sorts of cosmic dangers. At the heart of this complex belief system lies the concept of the Fivdi, the part of you that we might think of as your personality, your essence, or your individuality. The Bai was often depicted as a human-headed bird, symbolizing its restless, free-spirited nature. It wasn't content to stay confined within the body. It had to fly, to explore, to wander, especially during sleep. The symbolizing it was curious and would often leave the body behind, traveling across realms. But the freedom it sought came with risks. The Fimbi deity could get lost in its journeys, far from the body, far from the protections of the waking world. And if it didn't return by dawn, the consequences could be dire. In contrast to the Fimbi, the Fimka represented your life force, your double. The Findi stayed closer to the body, tethered to it by its very essence. While the Findi wandered freely, the Findi kind remained with the body, needing nourishment, needing to draw energy from the realm of dreams. Unlike the Sivi Abapai, which was eager to explore, the Fivin Kai found solace in remaining close, but even it needed to interact with the dream realm to survive. It could, however, be drained or weakened during sleep, leaving the body vulnerable. Then there was the Fibiaki, the enlightened, transformed soul. This part of the soul was the result of one's efforts towards spiritual growth and transformation. The Fibiaki was considered a blessed state, one of power and wisdom, and it was closely linked to the afterlife. But during sleep, even the Fidiaki could face trials, particularly when it ventured through the realms of the dead, encountering gods and judges. It wasn't immune to the dangers of the night. The EDIP, or heart, was another key component of the soul. This was the seat of emotion, morality, and thought, the place where your conscience resided. The Phiphistidae was not just a symbol of love or sorrow, but of the moral compass that guided your every decision. During sleep, however, the Phiphistidae was vulnerable to judgment. It could be weighed by the gods, judged for its deeds, and found wanting, which could have dire consequences for the soul. Finally, there was the Fivanren, your true name, your identity. The Sivivan was the most sacred part of you, tied to your personal power and immortality. It was the key to your existence, and if it was forgotten, lost, or stolen, it meant the destruction of your very being. During sleep, the Fivan could slip away. If it was lost in the dream world, the individual could cease to exist entirely. To forget your name, or for it to be stolen, was a fate worse than death. Each of these parts had its own role to play in the journey of sleep, and each one carried its own vulnerabilities. The 50 Bastai could get lost, the 50 Kai could be drained, the 50 good deities could be judged, the 50 Ren could be forgotten, and the 50 tested. The Egyptians understood that when these parts of the soul were not properly aligned, the consequences could be disastrous. Imagine for a moment what it would be like if your personality, your life force, your emotions, and your identity were all separate entities that had to work together to ensure you woke up whole. If any of these parts failed to return to their rightful place, you might wake up less than yourself, or in the worst case, not wake up at all. This was the heart of the Egyptians' understanding of sleep. It wasn't just a break from the waking world. It was a delicate, intricate process in which multiple parts of the soul had to reunite. And if the soul's components were not carefully watched over and nurtured, they could become lost, leading to restless nights, illness, or even death. These spiritual components didn't just coexist, they interacted, fought, and balanced each other in a dynamic dance that took place every night. And sometimes, the results were not as harmonious as they should have been. In fact, many of what we now call sleep disorders may have been understood by the Egyptians as conflicts between these soul parts. Perhaps the 50 Iphebi wanted to wander, but the Fifani Kavad kept it tethered to the body, causing restlessness and troubled sleep. Or maybe the Iabi was weighed down by guilt or anxiety, disrupting the sleep cycle. The very idea of dreams could have been a way for these parts of the soul to communicate with each other, or to attempt to return to their rightful place in the body. The Egyptians didn't see these as abstract concepts. They saw them as real, tangible parts of the self that required careful attention and protection. And this is where things get truly fascinating. If you've ever woken up feeling strangely disoriented or disconnected, as though you weren't quite yourself, you felt a tiny echo of the ancient Egyptian understanding of sleep. The real question the Egyptians posed was this: if something was leaving the body each night, and each part had its own journey, what exactly happened to these parts? Where did they go, and how did they find their way back? These are questions that the Egyptians explored through their rituals, prayers, and art, but they also remain questions that we today are still grappling with. So what happened when these parts didn't reunite by dawn, when the journey was incomplete, when the Fidi wandered too far, or the Fingerpimber was too weak, or the Findavenden was lost? What then? To understand the full consequences, we must dig deeper into where these soul parts went during their nightly travels. And more importantly, what happens if they never make it back? Each night, when the Egyptians closed their eyes to sleep, one part of their soul, Thabas, took flight. But this wasn't some metaphorical, abstract departure, it was literal. In the Egyptian mind, the Fudibai wasn't simply an essence or a personality. It was a restless, adventurous bird with a human head that could soar freely through the night sky. This bird soul was often depicted perched on trees, flying above sleeping bodies, or soaring through vast, unseen realms. The iconography was rich and vivid. The Fividba was a symbol of freedom, individuality, and personal connection, and yet it was also a source of great danger. When Egyptians fell into deep sleep, it was believed that their Fivida Aviaki exited their body through the mouth or nose. This was no symbolic act, it was a physical separation. Some priests or spiritually attuned individuals could even see the Fendi Basta leave the body, witnessing the flight of this bird, like soul as it ventured beyond the confines of the human form. The Fendi Tibasad was not content to stay tethered to the body. It longed for experiences, connections, and journeys. The Baba wanted to visit loved ones who had passed away, which could explain dreams of deceased family members. It yearned to fly to distant, sacred sites, hence the dreams of temples, exotic lands, and places of great significance. It also craved communion with the divine, explaining dreams that felt prophetic or filled with the presence of gods. The Basebai was a soul on a mission, forever restless and seeking. But this freedom came with risks. The Thebai Dai's adventures could be perilous. If it wandered too far from the body or got caught in unfamiliar realms, it could become lost, unable to find its way back. This was more than just a spiritual setback. It could cause serious harm to the person whose Bersenbu had strayed. If the failed to return, it left the person in a state of disorientation, sadness, and even illness. In some cases, the person might appear physically present, but mentally or emotionally distant. The Bayam's absence could be so profound that it created conditions that sound hauntingly familiar to us today: dissociation, depression, or a deep sense of loss. Medical texts from ancient Egypt describe cases where individuals reported that their Thivridi Baya had become lost, leading to symptoms that would resonate with modern psychological terms. There was a clear understanding among the Egyptians that the Thivridi needed freedom to remain healthy, but too much freedom came with a heavy price. If the Thivridi stayed trapped in the body for too long, too attached, too grounded, it would lead to depression and a stagnant existence. But when the Thivridi flew too far, it risked being seduced by malevolent spirits, captured by demons, or simply forgetting the way home. The balance between freedom and safety was delicate, and the Egyptians knew it all too well. They knew that without the proper guidance, their Thivridi could wander too far and become lost in realms from which it could never return. And so, to protect the soul from these dangers, the Egyptians took specific measures. Amulets, shaped like the Findibabai bird, were commonly worn or placed near the sleeping body, meant to guide the Findibai safely back. Protective spells were recited to ensure that the Findibai wouldn't stray too far, and that it would return by dawn. Offerings were left out before sleep, food, incense, and symbolic gifts, to encourage the Findibai to stay close to the body and prevent it from drifting into dangerous or unfamiliar realms. The Egyptians took their protection seriously because they understood how critical the Thivridai's return was to maintaining their health, their identity, and their connection to life. The connection between the Thivridai and dreams was explicit in Egyptian thought. The hieroglyph for dream literally included the symbol of the Simba, the Simba, cementing the idea that dreams were a manifestation of the Findab's nightly journey. Dreams weren't just random thoughts or reflections of the day, they were active, meaningful experiences in which the Simba Ba took part, travelling through the unseen world. The Bayam's flight was visible in the dreamscapes it created, each dream an echo of its wanderings, its longing, its curiosity, and its perilous path through realms both familiar and foreign. Perhaps the most disturbing revelation about the Fundibar's flight is that some Egyptians believed sleepwalking occurred when the Funitwanka, the life force, tried to follow the Fundibai on its journey. The cafe, tethered to the body, was not meant to travel far, but when it sought to accompany the Funde Bay, it would drag the body along, causing the person to move in their sleep. This phenomenon, the Egyptians believed, was a result of the Finkas' attempt to reunite with the Funbei in flight. And so, when you woke up in the middle of the night and found yourself walking through the house, disoriented and half-conscious, it wasn't just a random occurrence. It was a sign that your Thuvikai had gotten lost in the journey, trying to find its way to the Fiba, the soul desperately trying to complete the nightly cycle. When we look at these ancient beliefs, it's easy to see how they connected their understanding of the Sindibai to our own experiences. Dreams of lost loved ones, feelings of deep sadness or confusion, sleepwalking, these are not new concepts. They echo the ancient Egyptians' deep-seated understanding of the Fivdambai's flight and the potential consequences of its straying too far. The Egyptians didn't see sleep as a simple act of rest. They saw it as a complex journey, one that involved all parts of the soul and required careful balance. The Poseidon flight was both a blessing and a curse. It allowed for freedom, connection, and transformation, but it also carried risks. And as the Egyptians understood all too well, the line between health and harm was thin. If the Findibai strayed too far and didn't return, it wasn't just a spiritual loss. It was a loss that could affect the body, mind, and soul. The balance was fragile, and it was something the Egyptians took seriously. But as we look deeper into the mystery of the Findia's flight, we must ask, did other parts of the soul also leave the body during sleep? Did they too venture into realms beyond the waking world? And most crucially, where did they go when they left? The answer to these questions requires us to delve into one of the most enigmatic realms in Egyptian cosmology, the realm where gods and spirits resided, where the dead journeyed, and where the soul travelled at night. As the Egyptians saw it, sleep was not just a nightly respite, but a journey, a delicate and dangerous one. Every night, the Thidi, Bava, Kava, Adbi, and other soul components set off for realms beyond the waking world. But what happened when these parts didn't return by dawn? The results were often catastrophic, both physically and mentally. In medical papyri, ancient physicians describe symptoms of what we would now recognize as coma, persistent vegetative states, and severe dissociative disorders. But to the Egyptians, these weren't just physical ailments, they were signs of soul illness. And such afflictions required an entirely different kind of treatment. Unlike physical illnesses, which were treated by doctors, soul illnesses were addressed by priests, experts in the spiritual realm. The Egyptians believed that the soul, made up of multiple distinct parts, could become lost, fractured, or weakened during sleep. When the Fidab wandered too far, or the Finke weakened, the person could suffer from symptoms that sounded eerily similar to conditions we associate with modern psychiatric and neurological disorders. One case, found in the medical texts, tells the story of a nobleman whose Baiti-Vaitindab refused to return after a traumatic event. This caused him to fall into a deep, prolonged unconsciousness. Despite the best efforts of physicians to treat him, he remained in this state for months, unable to fully wake, as though his very soul was trapped in another worldly realm. Another case involves a woman whose Baiti-Calm weakened during sleep, causing a slow progressive wasting disease. The Kafi, tethered to the body, needed energy from the dream realm to remain strong. But when it was deprived of this, it grew weak, and the woman's health began to deteriorate. It wasn't just her body that was ill, it was her soul that had been fractured and left vulnerable during sleep. There were even cases of people whose Daurin, their true name or identity, was stolen in dreams. This was thought to cause severe changes in the person's personality, memory, and sense of self. What we would now recognize as amnesia or dissociative identity disorder may have been viewed by the Egyptians as a direct result of the Fitherin being taken by malevolent spirits or lost in the dream world. The individual would forget who they were, losing not only their memories but their very sense of identity. For these soul illnesses, the Egyptians turned to the priests. They didn't rely on medicine alone to heal the afflicted. They performed rituals, cast spells, and made offerings to call the Fendibi back or to restore strength to the Fendikandidi. Special ceremonies were designed to reunite the soul with its parts and guide them safely home. The Egyptians believed that these rituals could work magic, ensuring the return of the soul fragments that had strayed during sleep. Archaeological evidence suggests the existence of soul retrieval specialists, priests who were trained in the art of entering the dream realm themselves to retrieve lost soul parts and guide them back to their rightful place in the body. But what happened when the soul didn't return at all, when the Baiti or Finkai couldn't find its way back from the realms of the dead? This is where the darkest aspect of Egyptian beliefs about sleep comes into play: sleep death. There are documented cases of people who fell asleep and simply never woke up. Physicians often concluded that their Fibama had permanently departed, or worse, had become trapped in the Duat. The Egyptian underworld for the Egyptians, this was the ultimate horror. Death was not merely the cessation of life, it was the permanent loss of the soul's components, a scattering of its fragments that could never be reunited. This notion of sleep death wasn't just a theory, it was a genuine fear for the living. Some tombs contain inscriptions that suggest the deceased died during sleep, and their funeral preparations focused heavily on reuniting their soul parts. The soul was considered so fragile that even in death, the journey could go wrong. The elaborate funerary rituals that accompanied burial weren't just about preparing the body. They were meant to ensure that the soul's components would find each other again in the afterlife. The Sivdi, Bafifka, the Sivinka, the Sivina, all needed to be carefully guided back into a cohesive whole. If this didn't happen, the deceased would remain lost, their soul fragmented and scattered in the afterlife, unable to enter the presence of the gods. In fact, the Egyptians considered the idea of dying peacefully in one's sleep to be the most terrifying fate of all. For them, such a death meant that the soul had already begun to fracture and scatter during the night. The Bai may have wandered too far, the Fagai may have weakened, the Favaniran may have been lost. And so when the person died, they were already incomplete. They had died in a state of soul fragmentation, unable to fully reunite their essence in the afterlife. The Egyptians believed that to die in this way was a form of spiritual death, one that left the soul forever trapped, unable to complete its journey into the afterlife. The implications of this were profound. For the Egyptians, death wasn't merely the end of the body, it was a process that required careful preparation. And this preparation didn't just occur once, at the time of death. It was something that began every night when they closed their eyes to sleep. Sleep wasn't a simple act of rest, it was a mini-death, a journey of the soul that required vigilance and protection. And when the soul didn't return fully by morning, the consequences could be devastating. This concept of sleep-death challenges our modern understanding of peaceful slumber. To the Egyptians, sleep was anything but peaceful. It was a fragile state, a tenuous balance between life and death. And if the soul parts didn't return, there was no waking up at all. This unsettling idea forces us to reconsider our own beliefs about sleep and death, and perhaps even question what happens to our souls when we close our eyes at night. Are we, like the Egyptians, embarking on a journey of our own, vulnerable to the same risks? And if our soul parts do leave us each night, what happens when they don't come back? These questions, unanswered for millennia, continue to haunt us, just as they haunted the ancient Egyptians. The duat, to the ancient Egyptians, this was not just an abstract concept. It was a parallel dimension, an unseen realm that coexisted with the physical world, often translated as the underworld. The duat was far more complex and enigmatic than a simple resting place for the dead. It was a land of mystery, populated by gods, demons, and everything in between. And shockingly, it wasn't only the realm that souls entered after death, it was also the realm they journeyed through every single night when they closed their eyes to sleep. One of the most astonishing pieces of evidence we have for the duat's role in the Egyptians' daily lives comes from the Fuvadi Book of Two Ways, an ancient text found in coffins, which acted as a kind of map to the duat. This was no ordinary map, it was a guide, not just for the dead, but for the living to navigate their nightly journeys. The map depicted two primary paths through the duat, and these paths were not symbolic. They were literal guides for the soul's journey through the mysterious and dangerous realms of the duat, which the Egyptians believed every soul entered during sleep. The idea that such maps were intended for the living as well as the dead reveals a deeply integrated view of the duat. It wasn't a place you went to only after death. It was somewhere you traveled to each night in your sleep, and these guides were meant to ensure that you survived your journey. The duat, as described in these texts, was more than just a formless void. It had a detailed geography. Rivers, lakes, islands, gates, and caverns all played a role in the soul's journey. Some regions were more welcoming, offering shelter or divine assistance, while others were hostile and dangerous. These features weren't simply allegorical. The Egyptians truly believed that their soul wandered through this dark realm every night, passing through physical-like spaces. In their cosmology, the duat was not just an ethereal, intangible place. It had real navigable geography, with different locations offering different challenges and experiences, but the descriptions of the duat are far from consistent. Different texts offer contradictory accounts, some suggesting that the duat was divided into regions, while others describe it as a singular expanse. Scholars speculate that these differences could represent various levels within the duat, accessible depending on the depth of sleep or the spiritual development of the soul. Some paths might lead to one region of the duat, while others led to entirely different areas, with the journey becoming more perilous the deeper into sleep, and the duat one went. Interestingly, hieroglyphic texts describe the duat as consisting of 12 distinct regions, each corresponding to one of the 12 hours of the night. This means that as the night wore on, the soul's journey would progress through these stages, with each hour marking a new phase in its journey through this shadowy realm. The 12 regions suggested a highly structured and ritualized belief in how dreams and the soul's journey unfolded during the night. This wasn't a random, aimless wandering. It was a carefully mapped, highly symbolic progression, one that mirrored the very structure of the night itself. Yet, despite the structure and geography, the duat was not simply a below-ground world, as we might imagine a traditional underworld. The Egyptians saw it as a perpendicular dimension, one that existed not beneath the earth, but alongside the physical world. It was a space that could only be accessed by souls freed from the constraints of the body. And though the duat was intricately mapped, it was also shrouded in a strange, all-encompassing darkness. This was not just the absence of light, as we might think of darkness, but a supernatural darkness, a thick, oppressive void that seemed to press against the soul. Torches could not penetrate it, and it was not simply an absence of illumination, but a sensation that engulfed the soul, warping the very nature of perception and consciousness. In their temples, the Egyptians believed certain pools of water acted as actual gateways to the duat. Sleeping near these sacred pools was seen as both a powerful and dangerous act. These pools, believed to be connected to the duat's waters, could offer a glimpse into the realm, but they also held a risk. The deeper the connection to the duat, the more vulnerable the soul became. It was a place where one could easily become lost, or worse, trapped in the shifting labyrinth of the underworld. The fact that these pools were seen as gateways to the duat, along with the belief that sleep itself was a journey through these shadowy waters, introduces a chilling implication. Each night we too may be travelling through this darkness, unaware, unprotected, and at the mercy of the unknown forces that inhabit this realm. The duat wasn't just a realm of gods or demons. It was a space the Egyptians believed they navigated every night, a journey that required strength, courage, and protection. The Egyptians didn't just imagine the duat as an abstract, distant place. They saw it as a living, breathing part of their existence. It was a place they visited, and they believed it was filled with forces that could help or hinder them, depending on their actions, their protection, and their understanding of the journey. Every night, as the soul separated from the body, it ventured into the duat, a realm that was as real to the Egyptians as the waking world. But understanding the geography of the duat raises an immediate question. What was the purpose of this journey? Were souls simply wandering aimlessly through these regions, or was there a deeper purpose, a goal to the nightly journey? And if there was a destination, what did it mean for the soul to reach it? To answer these questions, we must look closer at the structure of the duat and the experiences souls were meant to undergo there. The Egyptians believed that the journey through the duat was far from random. It was a purposeful, transformative passage that every soul, living or dead, had to endure. The duat was a place of structured chaos, divided into 12 regions that corresponded to the 12 hours of the night. Each region held its own mysteries, dangers, and inhabitants, each presenting different challenges as the soul travelled deeper into the unknown. The journey through these regions wasn't a random event. It was a progression, a system, with each hour marking a deeper level of the duat, where different beings and trials awaited. The first hour was the entry point into the duat, a relatively safe region where familiar symbols from recent dreams appeared. Here, the soul was still tethered to the waking world, and the journey hadn't yet fully begun. In this space, the dreamer might encounter benign imagery, familiar places, family members, or comforting symbols. It was a transitional space, one that allowed the soul to ease into the deeper, more challenging regions of the duat. As the journey progressed into the second hour, the 50 buyer, the restless part of the soul, encountered the spirits of deceased ancestors. The Egyptians believed that the ancestors had a powerful role in the afterlife and could offer guidance to those still living. In this region, the soul might be met with the comforting presence of these spirits, offering advice, protection, or a reminder of its purpose. But as the soul moved deeper, the journey would become less predictable. The third hour was marked by the crossing of waters, a symbolic and physical barrier in the duat. In Egyptian mythology, water often represented transition, purification, and the crossing into new realms. Here, the soul might encounter rivers, lakes, or seas that needed to be navigated, both literally and metaphorically. The act of crossing water symbolized the crossing between worlds, between life and death, and between consciousness and unconsciousness. It was here that the first real trials began, as the soul faced challenges in its journey. By the fourth hour, the soul was deep enough into the duat that the first real trials occurred. The soul encountered more malevolent forces, dark entities that posed a threat to its safe passage. The darkness of the duat, ever-present and oppressive, became more tangible here. These trials were not just tests of strength, but of moral integrity, perseverance, and wisdom. Souls who were unprepared for these tests might find themselves losing their way, unable to proceed, or even trapped in a cycle of confusion. The fifth hour was the deepest part of the duat, the darkest, most mysterious region. This was where the most profound dreams and visions took place. The deeper the soul went, the more intense and surreal the experiences became. The fifth hour was a place where the soul was at its most vulnerable. This was a space where the line between reality and illusion blurred completely. The dreams in this region were not merely reflective of the subconscious, they were transformative, powerful, and often terrifying. The soul could be consumed by these experiences, trapped in a web of its own fears and desires. In the 6th through 8th hours, the journey began to reverse. As the night wore on, the soul started its gradual return toward the waking world. This was the turning point, where the journey shifted from the depths of the duat back toward the safety of consciousness. However, this wasn't always an easy transition. The soul had to resist forces in these regions that wanted to keep it trapped in the duat, to prevent it from returning to the body. These forces were not always malevolent, but they sought to retain the soul in their domain, either for their own purposes or simply because they were part of the natural flow of the duat. As the soul neared the 9th hour, the journey began to feel more familiar again, as the soul approached the surface of waking consciousness. But this wasn't the end of the journey. In fact, many of the beings that inhabited the duat were not necessarily evil, but simply neutral or indifferent to the soul's fate. By the time the soul reached the 10th, 11th, and 12th hours, it was almost back to the waking world, but not before encountering the final obstacles, beings and entities that tested its willpower, determination, and ability to re-enter the body. Interestingly, the Egyptians placed great importance on the time at which a person woke up. The time you awoke indicated the depth of your journey through the duat. Waking up during the early hours of the night meant the soul had not ventured far, while waking during the later hours indicated a deeper, more intense journey. It was believed that waking in the wrong hour or having a disturbed sleep cycle could lead to serious spiritual consequences. If the soul hadn't completed its journey properly, it could be left incomplete or trapped within the duat, unable to return to its physical body. One of the most fascinating details is that Egyptian temples themselves were built to mimic the geography of the duat. Many temples had 12-pillared halls, representing the 12 regions of the duat. These architectural designs were not just symbolic, they were intended to help priests practice the journey of the soul while still awake. In these sacred spaces, priests could undergo rituals that allowed them to symbolically journey through the duat, preparing them for the real journey they would take each night. This practice was integral to their spiritual development and connected them more closely to the gods and to the afterlife. Throughout the duat's 12 hours, the soul encountered a wide variety of beings. In the early hours, the spirits of ancestors and helpful deities guided the soul along its path. In the middle hours, neutral beings existed, neither helpful nor harmful, simply part of the landscape of the duat. But in the deeper regions, particularly in the 5th hour and beyond, the soul encountered more dangerous and hostile beings. These entities actively sought to prevent the soul from completing its journey, or even consumed it entirely. Nightmares, the Egyptians believed, occurred when the soul accidentally wandered into the wrong region at the wrong time. If the soul found itself in the 7th hour too early in the night, or if it became trapped in the 5th hour for too long, it could experience frightening, disorienting dreams. These dreams weren't random, they were a result of the soul's failure to navigate the duat correctly. Moreover, time in the duat didn't follow the same rules as time in the waking world. Dream time and clock time didn't align. Sometimes, hours in the duat passed in what seemed like minutes of actual sleep, and other times, the reverse happened. This made the journey unpredictable, as the soul could be lost in a particular region for what felt like an eternity, only to find that only moments had passed in the waking world. The deeper into the night you slept, the deeper into the duat your soul travelled. Each hour down meant new dangers, new tests, and new beings waiting in the dark. The journey was never simple, and each soul had to navigate the complexities of the duat, its geography, its trials, and its inhabitants, in order to safely return to the body by dawn. Now that we understand the structure of the duat and the trials that lay ahead for every soul, We must ask, who were the beings that inhabited this mysterious realm? What did they want? And why did they pose such a threat to the soul's safe passage? The answer to these questions lies in the darker forces of the duat, and in the beings that could either guide or consume the soul. In the duat, the realm of night, souls did not journey alone. They encountered beings of every kind, benevolent, neutral, and dangerous. These entities, whether guardians, guides, or threats, played essential roles in shaping the soul's nightly experience. To the ancient Egyptians, these encounters were not mere metaphors. They were real, tangible parts of the soul's journey, and every being in the duat had its own purpose, whether to protect, challenge, or consume the wandering soul. Among the benevolent entities were the gods who took an active role in guiding and protecting souls. Thoth, the ibis, headed god of wisdom, was one of the most important guides for lost souls. As the god of writing and knowledge, Thoth held the keys to the duat's mysteries. His role was to help souls find their way through the labyrinthine regions, ensuring they were not lost to the darkness. Anubis, the jackal, headed god associated with embalming and death, had a similar role. While Anubis is often seen as the guide for the dead, he was also deeply involved in the soul's journey through sleep. Just as he guided the dead to the afterlife, he guided the Fudibar, the part of the soul most likely to wander through dangerous areas of the duat. Anubis protected the soul from being swallowed by darkness, ensuring its return to the body at dawn. Ancestors also played a protective role. They watched over the souls of their living descendants, keeping a vigilant eye on their 50 eyes during the nightly journey. These protective spirits were believed to ensure that the soul was guided safely, and they could intervene if something threatened the journey. Ancestors offered protection and reassurance, helping the soul navigate the unknown and the terrifying. But not all beings were benevolent. Some were neutral, serving specific functions in the duat's complex geography. These were the gatekeepers, beings that guarded transitions between regions of the duat, ensuring only those with the right knowledge could pass through. The Egyptians believed that passing through each region required the soul to prove itself, often by reciting magical passwords or invoking the correct prayers. The Book of the Dead contains numerous spells that served as these dream spells, teaching the soul what to say and how to act when encountering these gatekeepers. Without the proper incantations, the soul could be trapped, unable to progress further. These gatekeepers were not inherently malevolent. They simply served as barriers, ensuring that only the worthy could navigate deeper into the duat. However, the deeper the soul travelled, the more dangerous its encounters became. The duat was home to powerful, malevolent beings, serpents that coiled around the Thivandibai, attempting to prevent its flight back to the body. These serpents were not just physical threats, they were spiritual blockages, forces that sought to trap the soul in the duat, preventing its return to the living world. Similarly, crocodile demons lurked in the waters of the duat, waiting to devour the souls that ventured too close. These creatures, tied to water and the underworld, represented the danger of becoming lost in the depths of the duat, never to return to the body. The most fearsome of all was Apophis, the great chaos serpent. Apophis embodied chaos, darkness, and destruction. Each night, Apophis attempted to devour the sun god Re as he travelled through the underworld, bringing terror and nightmares to every soul journeying through the duat. When Apophis struck, it wasn't just Ra who suffered. Every soul travelling through the duat felt the effects. Souls that were already navigating the realm experienced intense nightmares, their journeys disrupted by the terror and disorder Apophis brought. The serpent's attack was not just a cosmic event, it was felt personally by every soul, turning the peaceful journey of sleep into a nightmarish struggle for survival. But there were also more mysterious beings in the duat, entities that operated on principles beyond good or evil. These beings were neither fully helpful nor entirely hostile. Instead, they existed as ambiguous figures, operating by rules and logic that the living couldn't fully comprehend. Some of these entities might help a soul if it approached them in the right way, offering guidance or assistance. Others, however, would consume the soul if it made a misstep, causing it to be trapped in the duat forever. These beings operated on alien principles, and interacting with them required knowledge and respect for their ways. Among these entities were the dream demons, hostile beings that thrived on fear, confusion, and soul energy. These entities were attracted to sleepers who went to bed anxious, unprepared, or emotionally unsettled. The Egyptians believed that these demons fed on the negative energy generated by fear and stress. When a person's soul was weak or unprotected, these demons would take advantage, feeding on their essence and distorting their dreams into terrifying experiences. The Bab was particularly vulnerable to these demons as it wandered freely through the duat, exposed to whatever dangers lurked in the dark. To defend themselves from these hostile forces, the Egyptians developed a sophisticated system of protective measures. One of the most important tools in this defense was the knowledge of true names. In Egyptian belief, the true name of a being held immense power. By speaking a being's true name, a person could gain control over it, commanding it to aid or protect them. This concept extended to both deities and malevolent beings. If a soul knew the true names of the entities it encountered in the duat, it could invoke their power to avoid harm or secure their favor. Carrying the correct amulets was another vital defense. Amulets, shaped like the fudi by a bird, or inscribed with specific prayers and symbols, could make the wearer invisible to hostile entities. These amulets acted as shields, protecting the soul from being seen or targeted by the dangers of the duat. Knowing the right prayers and reciting them before sleep was another key part of the protective system. These prayers could summon deities like Thoth and Anubis, ensuring their presence and protection during the soul's journey. But perhaps the most unsettling revelation about the duat's inhabitants is that some of them were not external threats at all. They were souls that had become permanently lost during sleep. These souls, having failed to return to their bodies, had been transformed by the duat into something no longer human. They became wandering, restless spirits, trapped in the realms of the duat forever. These lost souls were the most tragic of all, as they had been consumed by the very realm they once traversed. In a sense, they were the ultimate warning to the living. The duat was a place of transition, and if a soul was not careful, it could end up lost forever. For the ancient Egyptians, the duat was not just a mythological afterlife. It was a real, living realm that interacted with the soul every night. The beings who inhabited this realm were not figments of imagination. They were real entities with their own agendas, and the soul's journey through the duat required knowledge, preparation, and protection. Some beings sought to help, others to harm, and still others to consume. The ancient Egyptians understood that navigating this dark realm was a delicate balance of wisdom, power, and spiritual strength. Now that we understand the dangers that awaited the soul in the duat, the next question becomes, how did the Egyptians prepare for these nightly encounters? What rituals, tools, and knowledge did they use to protect themselves from these entities? The answer lies in one of the most sophisticated and intricate magical systems ever developed. One of the most striking aspects of ancient Egyptian beliefs about sleep was their view of the heart, EB, not merely as the organ that pumped life into the body, but as the very seat of morality, emotion, and spiritual worth. The Egyptians believed that the heart was weighed every single night during sleep, not just at death. This idea redefines the way we understand the relationship between daily life, morality, and the afterlife, and it profoundly influenced how they approached sleep, dreams, and personal conduct. The concept of the side weighing of the heart, famously depicted in the Book of the Dead, has long been associated with the judgment of the soul after death. In this ceremony, the deceased's heart was weighed against the feather of Marat, the goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic order. If the heart was lighter than the feather, the soul was considered pure, free from wrongdoing, and ready for its journey into the afterlife. However, if the heart was heavier, weighed down by guilt or sin, the soul was devoured by the monstrous goddess Amit, forever lost. What is startling, however, is the belief that this process didn't only happen after death, it occurred every single night during sleep. The foidy weighing of the heart wasn't a final judgment reserved for the end of life. Instead, it was a nightly event, a ritual miniature of the grand judgment that took place after death. As the soul journeyed through the duat in sleep, the heart underwent scrutiny, facing a moral test as it passed through certain regions of the realm. This test wasn't as final as the one after death, but it was nonetheless significant. Failing the nightly test didn't result in annihilation or eternal damnation, but it did have consequences. The soul might face troubling dreams, spiritual weakness, or even be temporarily detained in the duat, unable to return to the body at dawn. The impact of this belief was profound. Your actions during the day directly affected your soul's journey at night. If you lived unjustly, lied, harmed others, or violated Marat in any way, your heart would be heavier, making the nightly passage more difficult and fraught with danger. In essence, the Egyptians believed that each day's actions had a direct, immediate effect on the soul's condition at night. This was a moral system that didn't just operate on abstract principles of justice. It had a tangible, daily consequence for how the soul navigated the spiritual realms during sleep. Nightmares, then, were not just random occurrences or the result of external stress. To the Egyptians, nightmares were seen as the soul's experience of the weight of its own transgressions. If someone had committed wrongdoing during the day, the Tiffinbai would feel the repercussions in the form of troubling dreams, visions of failure, guilt, fear, and loss. These were not seen as mere bad dreams. They were warnings, signs that the heart had failed the moral test and the soul was in danger. The act of sleeping was not just rest for the body, it was a spiritual reckoning. In response to this, the Egyptians developed a system of nightly moral preparation. Before going to sleep, individuals would recite negative confessions, a series of statements where they declared all the wrongs they had not committed that day. These confessions were nearly identical to those found in funerary texts, where the deceased would proclaim their innocence and purity before the gods. The idea was to lighten the heart, purging it of guilt before sleep, in the hope of passing the nightly judgment. Just as the deceased would strive to have their heart lighter than the feather of Marat in the afterlife, the living would strive to make their heart pure before sleep, ensuring a peaceful and safe journey through the dew-out. This practice had a deeply practical aspect. It reinforced a daily moral accounting system, one that wasn't distant or abstract, but immediate. The Egyptian moral system wasn't merely enforced by external punishments or laws, it was enforced by the internal experience of the soul. The daily actions of the living were constantly reflected in their nightly spiritual journeys. In a way, the Egyptians had created a direct link between their actions during the day and their spiritual health at night. Every morning that they woke successfully was proof that their heart had passed the nightly test. For those who suffered persistent nightmares or spiritual unrest, the Egyptians turned to priests for guidance. These individuals weren't necessarily seen as suffering from physical ailments. Instead, their troubled sleep was understood to be the result of a troubled conscience. Priests would offer moral counseling, guiding individuals through the process of self-reflection and helping them address the transgressions that weighed down their hearts. This daily spiritual accountability system was a critical part of Egyptian life, connecting morality with the rhythms of sleep and the afterlife. The idea that your heart was weighed every night and that your dreams were the verdict shifts the focus from abstract concepts of morality to something far more personal and immediate. It wasn't just a question of judgment after death, but a continual process where your soul testified against you every time you closed your eyes. Each night you faced a judgment of your own making, and the results of that judgment shaped your journey through the Duat. The Egyptians believed that by living justly, by following Marat, and by preparing their hearts before sleep, they could navigate the dangerous regions of the Duat and return to the waking world each morning, whole and unscathed. The moral implications of this system are vast. It suggests a deep personal connection between one's actions and their spiritual health, a connection that could not be escaped or ignored. Your soul was constantly being judged, and the consequences of failing that judgment were not just abstract, they were real, experienced every night. This view of the soul as a constantly evolving entity, judged each night for its deeds, created a society deeply attuned to moral behavior, one where personal integrity was of the utmost importance, because the soul's health depended on it. Now that we understand the importance of the nightly fire weighing of the heart, it becomes clear that sleep was much more than rest. It was an integral part of the moral and spiritual life of the Egyptians. But this was just one of many trials and challenges the soul faced during its nightly journey. The Egyptian night was filled with obstacles, each designed to test the soul's strength, integrity, and worthiness. To fully appreciate the significance of these trials, we must delve deeper into the nature of the soul's journey through the Duat, and the challenges it faced as it navigated this perilous and transformative realm. In the nightly journey through the Duat, the soul wasn't merely drifting aimlessly. It was tested, challenged, and scrutinized, with each trial requiring specific knowledge, magical power, and spiritual readiness. These trials weren't arbitrary, they were crucial to the soul's progress through the dark and mysterious realms. The Egyptians believed that passing these tests allowed the soul to journey deeper into the duat, reaching more significant and transformative dream states, while failing them meant being turned back, forced to wander lesser regions of the realm, unable to advance toward enlightenment or spiritual growth. The most common tests occurred at the gates that separated different regions of the duat. These gates were guarded by entities, deities, spirits, or magical beings that posed riddles, demanded passwords, or required the soul to demonstrate knowledge of sacred spells. Only those who could answer the challenges correctly were allowed to pass. If the soul failed to meet the guardian's demands, it would be sent back to less significant regions of the duat. Here, the soul might encounter familiar symbols or fragments of past experiences, but it couldn't progress to deeper, more meaningful dream states. The stakes were high, and each test represented an opportunity for growth, or a setback into spiritual stagnation. One of the most crucial pieces of knowledge for passing these tests was understanding the concept of magical names. The Egyptians believed that knowing the true name of a being or entity gave the soul power over it. This was especially important when encountering guardians or obstacles in the duat. To pass through a gate or hurdle, the soul needed to know the name of the guardian or even the name of parts of the realm itself. Souls had to name parts of boats, doors, even the very stones of thresholds, demonstrating that they had the necessary understanding to navigate the spiritual realm. This wasn't just about rote knowledge, it was about proving the soul's readiness, worthiness, and connection to the divine order. Names were power, and without them, the soul could not progress. For the wealthier Egyptians, this concept was taken to a practical extreme. They would pay scribes to prepare personalized dream books before they went to sleep, books that contained lists of names, passwords, spells, and incantations necessary for navigating the duat. These books acted as spiritual maps and manuals, ensuring that the soul was armed with the knowledge it needed to pass through each trial. The Egyptians knew that deep sleep was not just a time for unconscious rest. It was a time for spiritual preparation and transformation. To them, the cost of being unprepared was the potential failure to progress in the nightly journey, meaning their souls would be stuck in stagnant states, unable to reach higher, more enlightened levels of the duat. Another significant aspect of the soul's journey through the duat was the concept of transformations. In certain regions, the soul would need to take on different forms to navigate the space successfully. The soul might transform into a bird to fly over obstacles, a snake to slither through tight spaces, or even a lotus flower to blend into the surroundings. These transformations were symbolic of the soul's ability to adapt, change, and overcome challenges. Dreams of flying or shape-shifting were seen as indications that the soul was succeeding in the trials of the duat. The ability to navigate through different forms demonstrated spiritual flexibility and mastery over one's own essence. But some of the most difficult trials weren't about physical transformation, they were tests of perception. The duat was full of illusions, regions where everything appeared backward, upside down, or distorted. These regions tested the soul's ability to navigate the unreal, to see through deception, and to maintain clarity, even when the world around it was in chaos. Souls had to remain grounded in their purpose, understanding that not everything they saw was real. If they couldn't perceive things correctly, they would become lost or trapped in confusion. This trial symbolized the need for mental clarity and spiritual discernment. Interestingly, the Egyptians believed that vivid or lucid dreams were a sign of a stronger soul, one capable of successfully passing these tests. A soul that could engage deeply with the duat, one that was able to maintain control and clarity during the journey, was seen as more capable of overcoming the challenges posed by the realm. These souls had not only the strength to endure, but the wisdom to succeed, able to distinguish truth from illusion and to adapt when necessary. The deeper the soul journeyed, the more complex the trials became, and those who succeeded were believed to gain greater insight and divine knowledge. The consequences of failing these tests were significant. Souls who failed to pass through the gates or guardians would be turned back, forced to wander in less significant regions of the duat. This wandering was not just a minor setback, it could lead to recurring dream sequences where the soul was trapped in cycles of confusion and frustration. These recurring dreams were interpreted as the soul's struggle to break free from spiritual stagnation. Souls who failed to navigate the duat properly might also experience confusion upon waking, feeling disoriented, unrested, or unable to recall the details of their dreams. These were signs that the soul had struggled unsuccessfully through the trials of the night, leaving the dreamer spiritually unfulfilled. For the ancient Egyptians, the journey through the duat wasn't merely a dream experience. It was a series of trials that tested the soul's worthiness and preparedness. To dream deeply wasn't just about rest, it was about passing tests, answering riddles, and proving that the soul was ready to journey further into the night. The Egyptians saw sleep as an active and transformative process, where the soul could either advance or be set back depending on its knowledge, strength, and ability to navigate the challenges of the duat. Every night was a test, and every successful journey was a sign of spiritual growth and wisdom. These trials, tests of perception, transformation, and knowledge, highlighted the dual nature of the duat. It was both a realm of danger and opportunity, a place where the soul could either become lost or gain divine insight. Understanding this balance between threat and reward reveals why the Egyptians couldn't simply avoid deep sleep, despite the risks. They believed that by navigating the duat, souls were given the opportunity to grow, to be judged, and to ultimately reach a higher state of spiritual understanding. Having explored the various trials that the soul faced during its journey through the duat, we must now turn our attention to what these nightly journeys ultimately offered: the chance for divine knowledge, prophecy, and communication with higher powers. The duat wasn't just a place of challenges, it was also a realm that could grant the soul profound insights, secrets, and visions from the divine realm. To understand the full significance of the nightly journey, we must look at the rewards it offered to those who succeeded in its trials. The most fundamental and terrifying trial the ancient Egyptians believed every soul faced during its nightly journey through the duat was the duati ordeal of darkness. This darkness was not just the absence of light, but a living, active force, a primordial chaos pressing in from all sides, threatening the very existence of the soul. To the Egyptians, this darkness represented everything that stood opposed to order and coherence. Light was seen as the force of Marat, order, truth, and structure, while darkness symbolized chaos, dissolution, and formlessness. In the duat, this dark force actively worked against the soul, attempting to pull it apart, dissolve its integrity, or cause it to forget its very nature. The duat's darkness was not a passive absence, it was a consuming, chaotic presence that sought to break the soul down into its component parts. In this realm, the soul's form and identity were not guaranteed. The deeper the soul journeyed into the duat, the more vulnerable it became to the overwhelming force of darkness. The Egyptians believed that during deep sleep, the soul itself was susceptible to this dissolution. As the body rested and the soul ventured into the unseen realm, it risked losing its coherence. Dreams of being lost in vast, uncharted darkness, unable to see or find direction, were interpreted as the soul encountering the darkest, most dangerous trials of the duat. These experiences were seen as literal tests of the soul's ability to withstand chaos and remain whole. In Egyptian cosmology, darkness was not merely something to be feared, it was the primary trial that each soul had to face. Dreams of being lost, unable to find your way, or wandering in a vast, endless void were common symbols of this trial. The soul was lost in the chaos of the duat, struggling to hold on to its form and its identity. These dreams, deeply unsettling and often irrational, were interpreted as manifestations of the soul's battle against the primal chaos of the duat's darkness. The fear of this dissolution was deeply ingrained in the Egyptian psyche, and it was something every soul had to face. Conversely, dreams of finding light, a torch, a fire, a glowing being, were seen as signs that the soul was successfully resisting the darkness. Light in this context wasn't just symbolic, it was a divine force that allowed the soul to stay intact, to maintain its coherence in the face of overwhelming chaos. To find light in the duat was to prove that the soul could navigate the most difficult trials of the night, that it could resist the pull of dissolution and remain aligned with Marat, the order of the universe. The presence of light in dreams was thus interpreted as a powerful sign of spiritual success, proof that the soul was not only surviving but thriving, able to overcome the greatest threat the duat posed. To help protect the soul from the destructive forces of darkness, the Egyptians developed several powerful protective measures. Prayers for light were recited before sleep, invoking divine protection against the chaos of the duat. Amulets painted with luminous minerals, or inscribed with symbols of light, were worn to ensure that the soul had a spiritual beacon to follow. These amulets were believed to carry the light of the gods, ensuring the soul could navigate through the darkness and return safely. In addition to amulets, Egyptians would often leave oil lamps burning throughout the night, not simply for physical light, but as a spiritual safeguard. The lamps were not meant to illuminate the room for the body. They were meant to provide the soul with a guiding light, a beacon in the darkness of the duat. It was believed that the soul, while traversing the realms of the duat, could use the light of the lamp as a spiritual compass, ensuring its safe passage through the perilous regions of the night. The fear of darkness was not just a cultural construct, it was tied to the deepest spiritual experiences of the Egyptians. It wasn't simply the physical absence of light they feared. It was the soul's intuitive understanding of what that darkness represented, a force capable of erasing them from existence, of breaking apart their form and identity. This fear of the soul's dissolution during sleep may explain why some people, even in the modern world, have an innate fear of the dark. It's not just a fear of the unknown, but perhaps a primal, subconscious memory of the soul's nightly struggle against the formless void. Egyptian children were taught prayers specifically designed to help them pass through the darkness of the duat. These prayers weren't just for protection from physical harm, but were a spiritual preparation for the trials of the night. The idea that every human soul faced this darkness, this trial of formless chaos, was a universal concept in Egyptian thought. Darkness was not reserved for the dead. It was something all souls, living and deceased, had to navigate. The morning light was the ultimate salvation. It wasn't just a pleasant reprieve from sleep. It was the soul's triumph over the consuming darkness. In Egyptian cosmology, the arrival of daylight symbolized the victory of the sun god Ra, who fought off the forces of chaos each night as he traveled through the duat. Ra's victory was the soul's victory as well. When the sun rose in the morning, it marked the soul's successful return from the trials of the night, a sign that it had withstood the darkness and had been reborn, whole and intact. In this sense, the light of dawn was not just a physical phenomenon, it was a deeply spiritual moment. It represented the soul's survival, its journey through the chaos of the duat, and its eventual return to the physical world. The soul, having faced the deepest trials of the night, emerged from the darkness stronger, more complete, and more aligned with the forces of Marat. Now that we've explored the trials of darkness and the soul's battle for coherence in the duat, we must ask, what were the ultimate rewards for those who succeeded in these nightly journeys? If surviving the darkness was a test of spiritual strength, what did the soul gain by successfully navigating the duat? To answer this, we must look at the Egyptian view of dreams as divine communication and the potential for prophetic insight during the nightly journey. In the ancient Egyptian worldview, dreams were not just fleeting images or random brain activity. They were considered the most direct and powerful way for gods to communicate with humans. Gods, being non-physical entities, could not easily interact with mortals in the physical world. However, in the duat, the realm of the soul, gods had greater access to human consciousness. This space between waking and sleeping was where divine messages could be delivered most clearly. The Egyptians believed that their souls ventured into the duat every night, making dreams the perfect medium for gods to impart guidance, warnings, and prophecies. One of the most fascinating aspects of Egyptian belief in dreams was the practice of incubation dreams. People would deliberately sleep in temples, seeking divine messages while resting in sacred spaces. This was not seen as an eccentric or fringe practice, but as a respected and structured part of religious life. By sleeping in temples, individuals believed they could create a closer connection to the gods, who would then communicate directly through their dreams. These dreams were taken very seriously, often prompting significant actions or decisions based on the perceived divine revelations. A well-known example of this practice can be found in the story of Thutmose IV, the 18th dynasty pharaoh. Thutmose was said to have had a dream while resting near the Great Sphinx of Giza. In his dream, the god Harmachis promised him kingship in exchange for freeing the Sphinx from the sand that had accumulated around it. Thutmose interpreted this as a divine mandate and acted accordingly, clearing the sand and later ascending to the throne. This dream was seen not just as a personal vision, but as a political prophecy, guiding the future of Egypt itself. Such dreams were not isolated incidents. Throughout Egyptian history, many private individuals and officials recorded their dreams on stelae, seeking divine advice, warnings, or commands. These accounts demonstrate that the practice of seeking divine messages through dreams was widespread and deeply integrated into Egyptian society. Whether it was the pharaoh receiving guidance for his reign or an ordinary citizen seeking answers for personal matters, dreams were an essential part of life. To understand the significance of these dreams, we must explore the system of dream interpretation employed by the Egyptians. Dreams were not seen as arbitrary or meaningless. They were understood to be coded messages from the gods, and interpreting these messages required specialized knowledge. Priests were the primary dream interpreters, trained in the sacred art of decoding divine messages. They didn't use the symbolic analysis we might associate with modern dream psychology. Instead, they believed that God spoke in a specific structured language, one that could only be deciphered by those who understood the nuances and context of divine communication. One of the most important tools in Egyptian dream interpretation was the Foindream Book of the Chester Beatty Papyrus Seth, a text that catalogues hundreds of dream scenarios and provides their interpretations. This papyrus was a systematic guide for priests to follow, detailing what specific dream images meant and how to decode them. For example, a dream of a god speaking directly was considered highly significant, indicating a divine message that could alter the course of a person's life. Similarly, dreams that were repeated 3 times were seen as particularly potent, as repetition was considered a hallmark of divine intervention. Dreams that occurred in the last hour before dawn were also given special significance, as it was believed that the soul was closest to the gods during this time. This structured system of interpretation wasn't just for individuals seeking answers in their dreams. It also had profound practical implications for the state. Pharaohs and high-ranking officials were expected to report significant dreams to their councils, as these dreams could offer divine insight into matters of governance, military strategy, and policy decisions. If a pharaoh received a dream indicating that the gods disapproved of a certain action, or that a military campaign would fail, it could lead to a re-evaluation of plans. Likewise, dreams of divine favor could lead to the initiation of projects, such as temple construction or other state endeavors, in alignment with divine will. The connection between dreams and the state was also evident in the ways temples operated. Temples were centers of dream incubation, where priests and worshippers alike sought divine guidance. The interpretation of dreams influenced not only individual decisions, but also state policy and religious practices. This practice was integrated into the fabric of Egyptian governance, making dreams an essential part of how the Egyptians understood their relationship with the gods and how they conducted their daily affairs. Dreams, therefore, were not seen as mere personal experiences, but as vital forms of divine communication, with implications that rippled through every level of Egyptian society. The ability to interpret dreams was a highly specialized skill, and those trained in this art played a crucial role in maintaining the connection between the human and divine realms. Now that we've explored the Egyptians' belief that gods communicated through dreams, it's clear that these dreams were not just passive experiences but active messages that could change the course of history. However, the question arises, how did the Egyptians distinguish between ordinary dreams and those that were truly divine? What methods did they use to identify dreams that bore the unmistakable signature of the gods? The answer lies in the sophisticated system of observation, ritual, and learned expertise that the priests employed. To understand how the Egyptians made this distinction, we must delve deeper into their methods of interpreting dreams and the signs that indicated divine communication. In ancient Egypt, dream interpretation was not left to chance or guesswork. It was a refined and respected science. This discipline, practiced by specialized priests, was built on years of training, religious knowledge, and a deep understanding of the soul's journey through the duat. The Egyptians didn't view dreams as random or meaningless. Rather, they believed that dreams were a structured language through which the gods communicated directly with mortals. However, decoding this divine language required a sophisticated system of interpretation, one that combined empirical observation, religious teachings, and practical psychology. Dream interpreters were professional priests, highly trained in the sacred art of deciphering dreams. These interpreters were not only knowledgeable about the gods and their divine messages, but also skilled in understanding the psychological and emotional states of the dreamer. Their training involved years of study, learning to recognize patterns, symbols, and contexts that indicated whether a dream was a message from the divine or just a normal product of the soul's nightly wanderings. The interpretation of dreams followed well-established principles documented in surviving papyri. These principles were not arbitrary, but based on a deep understanding of how divine messages were structured. One of the key principles was the concept of opposites. For instance, a dream about crying could signify an upcoming joy or celebration. The Egyptians believed that many dreams operated on a principle of balance and duality. What was perceived negatively in the dream world often had a positive counterpart in the waking world. Similarly, a dream about hunger might indicate future abundance or nourishment. Another principle was sympathetic magic, a concept that suggested that what one dreamt could directly predict or influence reality. For example, dreaming of eating was often interpreted as a sign of forthcoming abundance or prosperity. This idea was deeply connected to the Egyptians' understanding of the soul's ability to influence the physical world, with dreams acting as a bridge between the two realms. The Egyptians also believed in a divine language, a system of symbols that consistently carried specific meanings. Certain symbols, such as the presence of particular animals or deities, were seen as divine markers and could be interpreted as direct communication from the gods. These symbols were not random, they held specific, predictable meanings. A dream of a snake might represent danger, while a vision of a god could be seen as a blessing or an instruction. Decoding these symbols required expertise and a deep understanding of the divine world. However, dream interpretation was not a one-size-fits-all practice. The meaning of a dream could vary greatly depending on who was dreaming, when the dream occurred, and the circumstances surrounding the dreamer's life. A dream of water, for example, might be a positive omen for a farmer, indicating abundance and fertility, but for a sailor, it could be a warning of dangerous waters or an impending storm. The context of the dreamer's life and occupation played a significant role in how the dream was interpreted, and the priests were skilled at taking these factors into account when offering their insights. When a dream was interpreted as a divine communication, offerings were often made to the god or deity that appeared in the dream. These offerings were not only an expression of gratitude, but also a way to maintain the relationship between the soul and the divine. By giving offerings, the dreamer sought to honor the god and secure continued favor or guidance. This practice was deeply ingrained in the Egyptian religious system, where communication with the divine was not just a passive experience. It required active participation and reciprocity. Egyptians distinguished between two types of dreams, prophetic and instructive. Prophetic dreams were those that foretold the future, offering a glimpse into events that had not yet occurred. These dreams were highly valued, as they provided crucial information about what was to come. Instructive dreams, on the other hand, were more focused on guidance for action. These dreams gave instructions on how to navigate challenges or what steps to take in life. Both types of dreams were seen as important, but prophetic dreams were given special reverence, as they were believed to come directly from the gods. Interestingly, the Egyptians also recognized what we would today call processing dreams. These were dreams that helped the soul process daily experiences or emotions and were not viewed as divine in nature. These dreams were understood to be the soul's way of sorting through the events of the day, working through unresolved feelings or issues. While these dreams were still important in their own right, they didn't carry the same weight as prophetic or instructive dreams. Dream interpretation, however, was not without its pitfalls. There were risks involved in misinterpreting dreams or being misled by false interpreters. Some texts warn against placing too much trust in all dreams, cautioning that not every dream was a message from the gods. The presence of false interpreters or those who deliberately misinterpreted dreams for personal gain suggests that the practice was not immune to manipulation. It was crucial to seek the guidance of qualified experts who could distinguish between divine messages and ordinary dreams. This recognition of the potential for error adds a layer of complexity to the dream interpretation system, highlighting the need for careful and informed analysis. Despite these challenges, the Egyptians believed that properly interpreting dreams was an essential skill, one that could reveal divine will and influence the course of history. Pharaohs, for instance, were expected to report significant dreams to their council, as these dreams could contain divine guidance affecting the entire kingdom. The political implications of dream interpretation were enormous, and it played a central role in decision-making from military campaigns to temple construction. The structured and systematic approach to dream interpretation in ancient Egypt reveals a deep, thoughtful understanding of the soul's journey and its relationship with the divine. Dreams were not random occurrences, but sacred messages that required knowledge, skill, and reverence to understand fully. The Egyptians believed that through dreams, the gods communicated directly with humanity, offering guidance, insight, and prophecy. With this understanding of the sacred science of dream interpretation, we now must confront the darker side of the duat's influence. While gods might communicate with the living through dreams, other entities, including the dead and malevolent spirits, might also reach out. This raises unsettling questions about who else could speak to the dreamer in their sleep, and what these encounters might mean. In ancient Egypt, the boundary between the living and the dead was not as clear, cut as we might think. The dead were believed to retain a strong connection to the living world, and one of the primary ways they communicated with their relatives was through dreams. Far from being passive or silent, the spirits of the deceased were thought to be active participants in the lives of their living family members, capable of offering advice, warnings, and even requests from beyond the grave. This belief in communication between the living and the dead through dreams was so entrenched in Egyptian culture that it led to the practice of writing letters to the dead, written messages placed in tombs, asking deceased relatives to appear in dreams and offer guidance. These letters, often standardized in their formulaic structure, reflected the deep reverence Egyptians had for their ancestors and their belief that the dead had a vested interest in the affairs of the living. The practice wasn't limited to immediate family members. Egyptians sought the wisdom of deceased experts, physicians, scholars, or even builders through dreams. These dreams were seen as an invaluable source of knowledge, much like consulting a living expert for advice. The idea that the dead retained an active role in the living world was a central part of Egyptian thought, and dream communication was viewed as an expected and even natural part of this process. There were two primary types of dreams involving the dead: benevolent and hostile. Benevolent dreams were those in which the deceased family members visited the dreamer to offer help, advice, or reassurance. These were welcomed encounters, messages from loved ones who were thought to continue watching over the family from the afterlife. Such dreams were viewed as a form of ongoing familial connection, as if the deceased were still present in a spiritual sense, guiding and protecting their living kin. However, not all interactions with the dead were so peaceful. Hostile dreams came from the improperly buried, vengeful spirits, or those who had been wronged in life and had not yet received justice. Nightmares of deceased individuals were often interpreted as signs that these spirits were dissatisfied with their burial rites or the state of their tombs. The Egyptians believed that failing to honor the dead properly could result in the deceased spirit seeking vengeance through dreams, demanding reparations or proper burial rites. In some cases, the deceased were said to appear in dreams, making complaints about the condition of their tomb or requesting offerings and rituals to appease them. These types of dreams were feared as they were considered to be a form of spiritual retribution. One of the most intriguing practices connected to the dream communication with the dead was the act of dream consultation. People would deliberately seek out dreams involving specific deceased individuals who were seen as experts in particular fields: physicians for medical knowledge, builders for construction advice, or scholars for wisdom. This practice reflected the Egyptians' belief that the dead held not only power and authority over their own affairs, but also continued to possess knowledge that could aid the living. Consulting the dead through dreams was seen as a practical way to gain knowledge, bridging the gap between the realms of the living and the deceased. To protect themselves from unwanted or harmful contact with spirits, Egyptians developed a variety of magical protections. Spells were written and recited to keep hostile dead spirits from entering dreams, ensuring that only benevolent ancestors or divine beings could make contact. Amulets were also used to filter which spirits could approach during sleep, providing a layer of spiritual protection for the dreamer. These protections were necessary because, while dream communication with the dead was expected, it was not always welcome. Spirits with unresolved issues, or those seeking justice, could be just as dangerous as malevolent gods or demons. The idea that the duat, the realm where both the living and the deceased journeyed, was a shared space, helped explain why such communications between the two worlds were possible. The duat was not only the afterlife for the dead, but also the space where souls of the living travelled every night. In this way, both the living and the dead existed in parallel, with the potential for interaction and influence across the boundaries of life and death. As such, dream communication with the dead was not just occasional, it was a natural expected occurrence. Interestingly, there was also a fear in ancient Egypt that the souls of the living might disturb the dead in their afterlife. Some Egyptians included spells in their tombs to control the dreams of the living, ensuring that their souls would not return in sleep to disturb the deceased. This fear reflects the complex and often uncomfortable relationship between the living and the dead. The idea that the souls of the living might wander into the afterlife and disturb the dead highlights the fluidity of boundaries between these two realms in Egyptian belief. The role of dreams in shaping family decisions and resolving disputes was particularly profound. Inheritance issues, property disputes, and even family dynamics could be influenced by dreams of deceased family members. The dead were seen as having the final word in matters of justice or legacy. If a dream indicated that a deceased relative demanded a certain course of action, whether it be repairing a tomb, making offerings, or settling an unresolved matter, it was considered binding. This shows how powerful the dead's influence was in shaping the living world, with dreams acting as a direct line of communication for their wishes. In these ways, dreams were not just personal or fleeting experiences. They were vital, powerful channels of communication that could shape lives, guide actions, and even affect the political and familial outcomes in ancient Egypt. The dead were not distant or forgotten. They were ever present, waiting for the right moment to speak, especially when the living were most vulnerable, in sleep. With this understanding of the deep and sometimes unsettling relationship between the living and the dead, we must now consider the most important question. If souls of the dead and living could meet in dreams, how could one protect themselves from these spiritual forces? How could a soul, once separated from the body, defend itself from hostile or malevolent spirits? The answer lies in one of the most sophisticated magical systems ever developed by the Egyptians, one designed specifically to protect the soul during its nightly journey. In ancient Egypt, sleep wasn't just a time of rest. It was a vulnerable state in which the soul journeyed through the perilous duat. The Egyptians believed that during sleep, their spirits were at risk of encountering malevolent forces, gods, demons, and spirits of the dead who could either guide or harm them. To safeguard the soul during this nightly journey, Egyptians developed an extensive arsenal of magical protections. These protections ranged from physical objects to rituals, all designed to ensure the safe return of the soul each morning. One of the most prominent physical protections used by the Egyptians was the headrest. These weren't just ordinary pillows, they were carefully crafted objects designed to safeguard the sleeper. The hard, elevated surface of the headrest symbolized divine protection, literally resting the head in the hands of a god. Many of these headrests were carved with protective deities, such as Bes, the dwarf god of protection. Bes was often depicted in a crouching position, a god who was specifically believed to protect sleep from nightmares and evil spirits. His image on headrests ensured that the sleeper was under his divine care, preventing harm while they rested. Other headrests featured lions, symbols of vigilance and strength, providing watchful power to guard against any dangers in the spiritual realm. In addition to headrests, the Egyptians used amulets, small, powerful objects imbued with magical properties, to protect the soul during its nightly journey. The Wedjat eye, symbolizing the all-seeing eye of Horus, was a particularly important amulet, believed to guard the sleeper even when their physical eyes were closed. The Fiziwejati eye was thought to watch over the soul as it travelled through the duat, ensuring its safety. Another important amulet was the Findi DJ pillar, a symbol of stability and endurance. The Findi DJ was believed to provide a grounding force, preventing the soul from scattering or being lost in the chaos of the duat. The symbol of life was also commonly used as an amulet. It was believed to channel life force to strengthen the Fivka, the vital essence that stayed close to the body during sleep. Placement of these amulets mattered as well. Some amulets were worn directly on the body, around the neck or wrists, while others were placed under pillows or near the head to protect the soul as it left the body. Some amulets were even placed at the entrances of bedrooms, ensuring that no malevolent spirits could enter the space. Additionally, amulets featuring the 4 sons of Horus, protective deities who guarded the 4 cardinal directions, were often carved into bed corners or placed in the corners of rooms. These sons of Horus were thought to offer spiritual protection from threats approaching from any direction, keeping the soul safe from external dangers during the night. Protective texts, written on papyrus or inscribed onto bed frames, were also commonly used. These texts weren't just decorative, they were functional magical shields, intended to ward off evil and protect the sleeper. The Egyptians believed that written words, especially those of a sacred or divine nature, carried immense power. By surrounding the bed with these written protections, they created an invisible force field, a barrier against spirits and chaos. Similarly, blankets and other bedding were sometimes woven with protective prayers, ensuring that the person remained safe and aligned with the divine forces throughout the night. Plants and herbs played an important role in creating a protective environment for sleep as well. Lotus flowers, revered for their spiritual significance, were believed to sanctify space and repel malevolent entities. The scent of lotus was thought to purify the room, creating an environment that was hostile to nightmares and chaos. Garlic was also commonly hung in bedrooms as a protective measure, its strong scent believed to repel evil spirits. Specific herbs were burned as incense, filling the air with protective fumes that created zones of safety around the sleeping body. These plants and herbs weren't just for physical health. They were seen as spiritual barriers that kept the soul protected from harmful influences. The positioning of the sleeper within the room also mattered. Egyptians believed that sleeping in specific orientations, relative to sacred sites or temples, could create spiritual alignment, ensuring that the soul was properly attuned to divine forces. For instance, sleeping with the head pointed toward a temple or a holy site was thought to ensure that the soul remained aligned with the divine order and that it would return safely from its nightly journey. This practice of alignment with sacred spaces was an integral part of how the Egyptians prepared themselves for sleep. In more wealthier households, professional night watchers were employed. These individuals were priests or spiritual guides who maintained vigilance throughout the night, performing protective rituals and incantations to safeguard the sleeping individuals. Their job was to ensure that the sleeper's soul was protected and to perform any necessary rituals if the soul encountered danger or needed guidance. This professional care added another layer of spiritual protection, as these night watchers had the expertise to ensure the proper rituals were carried out. The Egyptians understood that sleep was not just a time of rest, it was a vulnerable state in which the soul could be exposed to spiritual dangers. As such, every object in the bedroom, every ritual, and every prayer had a specific purpose: to protect the soul, guide it through the duat, and ensure it returned to the body in the morning, intact and unharmed. The Egyptians' approach to sleep was deeply practical, built on centuries of belief, ritual, and magical protection. These physical protections were essential, but they were not the only safeguard against the dangers of the duat. The most powerful defenses lay in the spoken word, the prayers, spells, and rituals that armed the soul with magical power before it embarked on its nightly journey. Understanding these rituals reveals how ordinary Egyptians, not just priests, prepared for sleep every single night. The next step in this process was not about material objects, but about invoking divine power through language, spoken at the threshold of sleep. In ancient Egypt, preparing for sleep was not simply a matter of settling into bed. It was a complex, multi-step ritual designed to ensure the soul's safety during its nightly journey through the duat. Egyptians understood that sleep was a vulnerable state, a time when the soul separated from the body and ventured into unknown and potentially dangerous realms. To protect themselves from the forces that could harm their souls, they followed elaborate bedtime rituals that involved purification, confession, prayer, and offerings. These rituals were not just personal practices, they were deeply ingrained in the daily routine of Egyptian life, with everyone from the pharaoh to the peasant engaging in some form of spiritual preparation before sleep. The first step in these nightly rituals was purification. The Egyptians believed that the body accumulated spiritual contamination during the day, through encounters with the physical world, through impurities in thought or action, and through the simple act of moving through a world filled with chaotic forces. To sleep unclean was to enter the duat polluted, making the soul vulnerable to hostile entities. Purification rituals often began with washing the hands and face, and in some cases, the entire body. This act of washing was not just physical, it was a spiritual cleansing, symbolizing the removal of any negative energies before entering the sacred space of sleep. The act of purification marked the transition from the waking world, full of distractions and temptations, to the spiritual realm, where the soul's journey would unfold. Once purified, the next step was the recitation of negative confessions. In this part of the ritual, the individual would declare aloud all the wrongs they had not committed that day, stating their innocence and reaffirming their alignment with Marat, the principle of truth and cosmic order. This was an important step because the Egyptians believed that the heart or 50 eye would be weighed during the night. If the heart was burdened by sin or wrongdoing, the soul would struggle to return to the body in the morning. By confessing their moral purity, the individual was attempting to lighten their heart before its nightly weighing, making it easier for the soul to pass through the duat unscathed. After the confession came the recitation of protective prayers. These prayers were specifically designed to safeguard the soul during its journey. One common prayer, still preserved in texts, might sound like, "Let not my soul be taken. Let my Subai return at dawn. Let my name be remembered." These prayers invoked divine protection and asked for safe passage through the duat. They also emphasized the importance of the soul's identity, requesting that the individual's to be FEI soul return to the body in one piece, and that their name, their true essence, be remembered by the gods. The Egyptians believed that to be forgotten by the gods was a fate worse than death, as it meant the soul would cease to exist. Once the purification, confession, and prayers were completed, the individual would then make a statement of identity and purpose. This step was especially important because the soul's journey through the duat was often seen as a quest for knowledge or transformation. The statement of identity reminded the individual of their role in the cosmic order, aligning their journey with the forces of Marat. Only then, with the soul prepared and protected, would the person lay down to sleep in the proper position, often with the head placed in a position of spiritual alignment. The right orientation of the body while sleeping was crucial. In some cases, this involved positioning the body towards sacred sites or temples to ensure alignment with divine forces. Another key aspect of the nightly ritual was the practice of dream dedication. Some Egyptians chose to dedicate their dreams to a specific deity, placing themselves under the protection of that god or goddess for the duration of the night. This was not just a personal request, but a formal offering, demonstrating trust and submission to divine will. In many cases, offerings would also be made to the sivdi by the soul, ensuring that it would not wander too far in search of sustenance. Food and drink were placed near the sleeper, as symbolic gifts to ensure the soul's comfort and safety. These offerings were intended to satisfy the sivdi by, keeping it from seeking out nourishment in other realms and ensuring a smooth return to the body. The bedtime rituals were often performed collectively, families, couples, or even entire households engaging in synchronized prayer and preparation before sleep. Collective prayer was believed to be more powerful, offering greater protection against the forces of chaos that might threaten any individual member of the family. These rituals were passed down from generation to generation, with children taught abbreviated versions of the rituals from an early age. The importance of these nightly rituals was so deeply ingrained in Egyptian culture that they were considered essential to the well-being of the soul. However, the rituals varied depending on the individual's circumstances. Pregnant women, for example, had specific protections to shield their vulnerable souls, as did those who were ill or traveling. Travelers often carried portable amulets and recited particularly intense prayers to ensure that their souls would be protected during their journey. The rituals were flexible, adapting to the needs of the individual, but the underlying structure remained the same: purification, confession, prayer, offerings, and alignment with divine forces. There was one crucial point that was universally acknowledged in Egypt. Skipping the bedtime rituals was considered dangerously reckless. Going to bed without performing these rituals was like entering battle without armor. It wasn't just seen as impious, it was seen as spiritually suicidal. The soul would be left vulnerable to attack, and the journey through the duat could end in disaster. This belief underscores the importance Egyptians placed on their nightly preparations. It was not just about avoiding bad dreams, but about ensuring the soul's safety and integrity in a realm full of unseen dangers. With these nightly rituals in place, the Egyptians created a shield of protection around the soul, guarding it from the hostile entities of the duat and ensuring that the spirit could travel safely and with divine favor. But despite all these protections, amulets, prayers, rituals, and offerings, sometimes the defenses failed. Nightmares would break through, hostile spirits would reach the sleeper, or the soul might become lost or trapped in the dark realms of the duat. When this happened, the Egyptians had emergency interventions ready to restore the soul. These interventions, as well as the specialists who could retrieve lost souls, were the last line of defense against the dangers that lurked in the night. But before we explore these emergency measures, it's important to understand what happened when the protective rituals failed. What kind of dangers did the soul face, and how could these risks be addressed in the morning after the night's ordeal? Even with all the careful preparations, prayers, and protections in place, sometimes the defenses Egyptians relied on to protect their souls during the night would fail. The consequences of these failures were not just abstract fears, they were tangible, immediate, and deeply unsettling. The soul could face real danger during its journey through the duat, and the signs of this danger were often evident upon waking. For the ancient Egyptians, the morning after a troubled night could reveal the state of the soul, its health, and whether it had safely returned to the body. One of the first indicators that magical protections had failed was waking in a state of terror or distress. A person might wake up in a state of extreme fear, as if they had been pursued or attacked by an unseen force. This terror wasn't just emotional, it was believed to be a physical manifestation of the soul's struggle during its journey. Similarly, waking up exhausted, despite having slept the entire night, was a sign that the soul had not rested fully or had been unable to regain its strength. The Egyptians believed that the soul needed to be reconnected to the body during sleep, and any disruption in this connection could leave the individual feeling drained or spiritually weak. Another alarming sign was waking with physical marks on the body, bruises, scratches, or cuts that had not been there before sleep. These marks were interpreted as signs of spiritual attack, physical evidence of a confrontation with malevolent forces in the duat. The Egyptians believed that hostile spirits could physically harm the soul during its nightly journey, and these marks served as proof of the soul's exposure to danger. Similarly, waking up unable to remember who you were, or with a sense of disconnection from one's identity, was a critical sign that something had gone wrong. In these cases, the individual's siren, their name, the essence of their identity, was believed to have been stolen or damaged. The ren was crucial for the soul's integrity, and if it was lost or altered, the person would experience deep confusion and disorientation. When these signs of failed protection were noticed, immediate post-nightmare rituals were performed to restore the soul and seal it back into the body. The first step in these emergency procedures was purification, often using natron salt, an ancient substance known for its purifying properties. The salt was used to cleanse the body and the spirit, removing any lingering negative energies from the soul's journey through the duat. After purification, the individual would undergo fumigation with protective incense. These rituals were designed to ward off the lingering effects of the nightmare and drive away any malevolent forces that may have followed the person back from the duat. Finally, emergency prayers were recited, invoking the gods to seal the soul back into the body and ensure that it would not wander again. One particularly fascinating concept in Egyptian thought was that of soul leakage. This idea was based on the belief that traumatic experiences, such as especially terrifying nightmares or encounters with malevolent entities, could leave parts of the soul still trapped in the duat, even after the person had physically woken up. This meant that some individuals didn't return from their nightly journeys fully intact. They would require specialist intervention to retrieve the lost fragments of their souls and restore their integrity. These soul retrieval specialists were highly trained priests, skilled in entering deep trance states to journey consciously into the duat and locate lost soul fragments. These specialists would guide the fragments of the soul back home, ensuring that the person was whole again. There are documented cases in the medical papyri of individuals who required this form of intervention. One case describes a woman who stopped eating after experiencing a nightmare. Her fenbati was believed to have been detained in the duat, unable to return to the body. A multi-day ritual was performed to call the fendibai back, restoring the woman's health. In another case, a man experienced amnesia after sleep, and his dendiven was believed to have been stolen. This required elaborate magical intervention to restore his identity and ensure he would remember who he was. These interventions were often lengthy and complex, reflecting the seriousness with which the Egyptians treated disturbances in the soul's journey. For those suffering from chronic nightmares or sleep disturbances, the Egyptians also had the practice of dream incubation, a therapeutic sleep in which individuals slept under the supervision of priests in temples, hoping to safely confront the source of their nightmares or recurring sleep disturbances. The priestly supervision ensured that the soul would be protected during this vulnerable state, and that any messages or guidance from the divine could be safely received. In cases where individuals were believed to be hosting hostile entities, spirits or demons that had followed them out of the duat, special exorcism-like rituals were performed. These rituals involved fumigation, verbal banishment, and the creation of protective zones that the entities could not enter. Such rites were intended to sever the connection between the soul and the malevolent entity, ensuring the person's safety and spiritual purity. Some temples even specialized in treating sleep disorders, recognizing that many sleep-related problems were spiritual in nature and required divine intervention rather than just physical healing. In addition to these interventions, the Egyptians also employed counter-magic when nightmares were believed to be caused by enemy curses. Counter-curses could be deployed to protect the soul from the effects of malicious magic, restoring balance, and ensuring that the dreamer was not subject to the forces of chaos. Despite these extensive measures, the Egyptians understood that not all interventions could guarantee a full recovery. In cases where the soul was severely damaged or repeatedly disturbed by failed protections, the person might develop a weakened soul. These individuals, believed to have suffered from repeated trauma during their nightly journeys, would never fully recover, and their spiritual integrity would remain compromised. In some cases, people lived with lingering confusion, disorientation, or a sense of incompleteness, never fully reconnecting with their souls. The most somber reality of all was that sometimes, despite all the rituals, prayers, and interventions, the soul would not return fully from the duat. These individuals, their bodies breathing, but their souls, still wandering in the dark, were often seen as permanently altered. Their spiritual journey, once interrupted, could never be fully repaired, and they would live out the rest of their lives in a diminished state, their connection to the divine and to themselves forever broken. This grim possibility highlights the fragility of the soul in Egyptian thought and the extreme importance placed on the nightly journey. It also underscores the central role of magical protections, rituals, and divine intervention in Egyptian spirituality. Sleep was not just rest. It was a dangerous and transformative process, and the Egyptians understood that the stakes were high. The soul's journey through the duat could be as perilous as the final journey of death itself, and it required constant vigilance, preparation, and protection. Understanding the connection between the nightly journey and the final journey of death is crucial to grasping the Egyptian worldview. Every night, as the soul entered the duat, it was rehearsing for the ultimate passage from life to death. The same protections and rituals that ensured the soul's safe return in the morning were the ones that would guide it through the afterlife, when its journey became eternal. In ancient Egypt, the daily cycle of the sun was more than a natural occurrence. It was a profound spiritual and cosmological event that linked the very survival of the world to the journey of Ra, the sun god. The Egyptians believed that Ra did not merely set in the west and rise in the east. He died every sunset and was reborn every dawn. This cyclical death and rebirth were not metaphorical. They were literal, and they formed the foundation of Egyptian cosmology. Just as Ra journeyed through the duat each night, every human soul participated in this cosmic cycle during their sleep. Ra's bark, or boat, was the vessel that carried him through the sky during the day. At sunset, the sun would enter the duat, the parallel dimension where souls travelled during sleep, marking the death of the sun and the beginning of Ra's journey through the 12 hours of darkness. This was no abstract concept for the Egyptians. They believed it to be an actual journey, one that Ra undertook every night in the same way the soul ventured through the duat. Ra's bark sailed through the darkness of the underworld, facing trials and enemies at each stage of the journey, battling chaos forces such as the serpent Apophis, who sought to devour the sun and plunge the world into eternal night. The Egyptians understood that this nightly journey was not just a celestial event. It was deeply tied to their own spiritual journey during sleep. They believed that every sleeping soul became part of Ra's crew, joining him on his journey through the duat. This wasn't a privilege reserved for the pharaohs or priests alone. Every human soul, regardless of status, participated in this cosmic voyage. When you slept, Your soul was believed to be part of Ra's bark, helping to fight off the forces of chaos and ensure that the sun would rise again the next morning. This was a radical concept of spiritual equality. Whether you were a peasant or a king, you sailed with Ra through the darkness, facing the same dangers and trials. What did this mean for the individual? Your dreams of struggle, conflict, or battle weren't just random thoughts or reflections of your subconscious. They were believed to be literal memories of your soul's participation in Ra's nightly journey. If you dreamt of serpents or darkness, it could be interpreted as an actual encounter with Apophis, the chaos serpent who sought to destroy Ra. Nightmares of being lost or trapped in darkness were seen as representations of the soul's struggle to help Ra complete his journey and avoid being swallowed by the forces of destruction. The more intense the dream, the more directly it was tied to the cosmic struggle between order and chaos. This belief in the connection between sleep and Ra's journey through the duat had profound implications. The Egyptians saw their survival as inherently tied to the success of Ra's nightly voyage. If Ra failed to navigate the duat and be reborn at dawn, the sun wouldn't rise and creation itself would end. The sun's daily rebirth was essential to the continuation of life, and the safety of each individual soul was crucial to the success of Ra's journey. Thus, the health and strength of the sleeping souls mattered, not just on a personal level, but cosmically, ensuring the very survival of the world. Prayers for protection during sleep were not only about the individual's safety, they were simultaneously prayers for Ra's success. Your safe return from the duat, your soul's re-entry into your body at dawn, was intricately linked to the sun's rebirth. This connection between personal safety and cosmic survival made sleep a sacred duty, a responsibility that each soul had to fulfill to ensure the continuation of creation. The Egyptians believed that if the souls of the living failed in their nightly journey, the world would falter and the sun might not rise again. The idea that death and sleep were the great equalizers was revolutionary. No matter a person's status, wealth, or position, every individual was believed to participate in the same cosmic struggle. Whether you were the most powerful pharaoh or the humblest farmer, you played a part in the success of Ra's journey, fighting to ensure the sun would rise once more. This cosmic equality was a central tenet of Egyptian thought. Sleep, and by extension death, were seen as universal experiences where all souls participated in the same sacred duty. As we now understand the profound role sleep played in Egyptian cosmology, it raises the question: what was the role of the individual soul in this cosmic journey? Were souls merely passive participants, or did they have specific functions during the nightly voyage with Ra? To answer this, we need to examine the role of ordinary souls in the solar bark, and why sleep was viewed not just as a biological necessity, but as a sacred, essential task with cosmic consequences. In ancient Egyptian thought, sleep was far from a passive or selfish activity. It was an active, essential role in the cosmic renewal of the world. Every night, as Ra's bark sailed through the duat, each sleeping soul was believed to participate in this grand cosmic drama. Souls were not simply passive witnesses, they played an integral part in ensuring the sun's rebirth. The Egyptians understood their nightly journeys as a form of service to the cosmos, a responsibility determined by their actions during waking life and their understanding of magical knowledge. Egyptian texts suggest that different souls had different roles aboard Ra's bark. Some souls provided spiritual energy through prayer, some fought off enemies, and others helped navigate or maintain the integrity of the boat itself against the forces of chaos. The soul's role was determined by their righteousness during their lifetime. Those who lived with honor, virtue, and knowledge were entrusted with greater responsibilities. For example, knowing powerful spells and names could grant a soul specific duties during their nightly journey. The names of the oars, for example, could allow a soul to assist with rowing the bark, while navigation spells could allow them to help steer Ra's boat through the difficult passages of the duat. This system created an incentive for Egyptians to learn and master magical knowledge during their waking lives, as the greater their understanding, the more crucial their role in the cosmic journey. This idea tied waking actions and magical study to the soul's position in the nightly cosmic drama. Those who had accumulated knowledge of divine names or sacred spells were seen as having earned their place on Ra's bark. Dreams of water, boats, or journeys could be interpreted as actual memories of the soul's nightly service. If someone dreamt of rowing or helping navigate a boat through tumultuous waters, it was seen as their soul remembering its part in Ra's journey through the duat. Dreams of collective efforts, where a group of people worked together toward a goal, were thought to reflect the communal nature of this cosmic service, suggesting that the individual soul had participated in Ra's crew, helping to fight chaos or maintain order. The Egyptians also believed that physical exhaustion upon waking could be a badge of honor. If a person woke particularly tired or drained, it was seen as proof that their soul had worked hard throughout the night, fighting the forces of chaos, particularly the serpent Apophis, who threatened to destroy Ra and the entire world. This exhaustion wasn't a sign of unsuccessful rest, but of successful service. A night of battle against Apophis or other cosmic enemies was believed to be a vital part of the cosmic order, and waking up tired meant the individual had successfully helped preserve the world's order. Certain individuals were believed to have natural roles as defenders of Ra's bark. These souls were seen as warriors in the front lines, constantly battling Apophis and other forces of chaos. Others played the role of sustainers, those who provided spiritual energy to keep Ra's bark sailing and maintain the power required to complete the journey. The Egyptians believed that souls who faced nightmares or night terrors were the ones who had fought the hardest battles during their journey. Nightmares in particular were thought to be literal encounters with the enemies of Ra, such as Apophis. Sleep paralysis, a common phenomenon, was even interpreted as a sign that the soul had held a crucial defensive position, maintaining a key role in Ra's protection during the journey through the duat. The belief in cosmic service during sleep also led to the concept of collective dreaming. According to Egyptian thought, all souls, whether they were aware of it or not, were connected during their nightly journeys. This collective dreaming formed a shared consciousness, a communal dream space where all sleeping souls participated in the collective cosmic mission. While most individuals couldn't consciously perceive this connection, it was believed that the souls of all sleepers were part of the larger effort to ensure Ra's successful passage through the duat. In this way, sleep wasn't just about individual rest or personal dreams. It was about participating in a grand universal purpose. This belief system gave profound meaning to the experience of sleep. Every individual's sleep, whether it was marked by nightmares or peaceful dreams, had cosmic significance. Your nightly journey wasn't just a biological necessity, it was a vital part of the universal order. Waking refreshed wasn't just a sign of personal rest, it was a sign that both the individual soul and the cosmos had successfully survived the night, ensuring the world would continue with the rising sun. As the Egyptians saw it, sleep was a preparation for the ultimate cosmic journey, death. The rituals, roles, and responsibilities that one performed during sleep were not isolated to the nightly journey. They were rehearsals for the final journey the soul would undertake at the end of life. If the soul was successful in its nightly service, it would be prepared for the final passage to the afterlife. This connection between nightly sleep and death was a central feature of the Egyptian worldview. The concept that sleep was a rehearsal for the final journey through the duat was a radical and profound belief, suggesting that the experience of sleep was far more than a temporary, unconscious state. It was part of an ongoing cosmic process of renewal. The radical equality in this belief system is profound. Pharaohs, priests, and peasants alike participated in this cosmic cycle, and no soul was exempt from the struggle against chaos. Everyone had a role to play, and sleep was the stage for this participation. The sun's rebirth wasn't just Ra's victory, it was humanity's victory, ensuring the survival of the world. Understanding the role of ordinary souls in Ra's journey through the duat provides clarity on why Egyptian funeral rituals mirrored their bedtime preparations. Both sleep and death were seen as cosmic transitions, with similar rituals and protections used in both contexts. The nightly journey, after all, was a training ground for the final passage. Death. As Egyptians prepared for sleep every night, they were also preparing for the ultimate sleep of death, making the connection between the two processes essential to understanding the full scope of Egyptian belief. In ancient Egyptian thought, sleep and death were not two separate, unrelated events. They were deeply intertwined, with death viewed as a continuation of the same cosmic journey the soul embarked on every night during sleep. The only difference between the two was whether the soul returned to the body at dawn or remained aboard Ra's bark forever. Egyptian funerary texts, many of which share the exact same language as the prayers recited before sleep, make this connection explicit, suggesting that death was simply the soul choosing not to disembark from the bark at the break of day. For the Egyptians, the deceased did not simply rest in some passive afterlife. Instead, they were active participants in cosmic maintenance, continuing the work they had done during their lives, fighting chaos, navigating treacherous waters, and ensuring that Ra's bark remained intact. The blessed dead were not seen as passive inhabitants of a heavenly paradise. They were essential members of the cosmic crew that worked to maintain the balance of the universe. The celestial journey that had started in the duat every night for the living souls continued for the deceased, now without the need to return to a physical body. This active participation in the cosmic drama was the true nature of the afterlife. This concept creates a profound continuity between life and death. Every night, living souls participated in the cosmic struggle, fighting chaos, maintaining order, and ensuring the sun's rebirth. This participation was not just a matter of personal spiritual growth. It was preparation for a role that continued into eternity. The living souls, through their actions during sleep, were essentially training for their eternal responsibilities aboard Ra's bark after death. Each night of sleep was, in essence, a rehearsal for the cosmic duties they would take up permanently when they passed away. Funerary texts also suggest that the dead could recognize the living souls aboard Ra's bark. Deceased parents could watch over their children as they slept, offering guidance or protection during particularly difficult dreams. Deceased friends could lend a helping hand during challenging dream passages, ensuring that their living counterparts made it safely through the dangers of the duat. This interconnectedness between the living and the dead was fundamental to Egyptian belief. Death was not a complete separation from the living world. It was an extension of the same cosmic journey, where the roles of the living and the dead were intertwined and cooperative. Moreover, the Egyptians believed that some souls could rise to greater responsibilities after death. Souls who had been diligent and virtuous during their lifetime could be promoted from basic duties, such as rowing or maintaining the bark, to more prestigious roles like steering the boat or defending it from chaos forces. The journey that began in life would continue with enhanced authority after death. In this system, the pharaoh was not just a political leader, they were a cosmic officer, wielding authority over the forces of the universe. The pharaoh's role as a divine ruler was intimately connected to their participation in Ra's nightly journey, a position they continued to hold after death, with greater responsibilities and power. However, there was a dark side to this belief. The Egyptians understood that not all souls successfully joined Ra's bark after death. Those who had been improperly buried or who had lived morally corrupt lives could fail to join the eternal crew. These souls would not become participants in the cosmic renewal. Instead, they would become hazards, chaos entities that threatened both Ra's journey and the souls of the living. Every hostile spirit encountered in the duat, every demon or malevolent force, was believed to be a soul that had failed to properly board Ra's bark. These souls, disconnected from their cosmic purpose, became forces of destruction rather than renewal, disrupting the balance of the universe. This view of death had profound implications for Egyptian funeral practices. Burial wasn't just about preparing for an unknown journey. It was about ensuring that the soul could successfully make the transition from the temporary journey of sleep to the eternal journey with Ra. The connection between sleep and death gave Egyptian funerary practices a deeper, more profound meaning. The rituals, the prayers, and the protections used in burial weren't just designed to shield the body from decay. They were preparations for the soul's eternal role in the cosmic system. Understanding this connection between sleep and death also sheds light on the famous guidebook of the Dedi, a text that was central to Egyptian funerary practices. The Findy Book of the Dedi wasn't simply a guide to navigating the afterlife. It was a manual for ensuring that the soul could continue its cosmic journey, just as it had done every night during sleep. The spells and prayers found in the Sudi Book of the Dead were designed to ensure that the soul could fulfill its eternal responsibilities aboard Ra's bark, protecting it from chaos and ensuring its place in the cosmic order. This profound view of sleep and death, as part of the same continuous cosmic cycle, allowed the Egyptians to approach both life and death with purpose and meaning. Sleep was not just a time to rest, it was a time to serve, to fight, and to ensure the world would continue. And death, rather than being an end, was simply the soul's eternal continuation of the work it had done every night of its life. The cosmic bark which carried Ra through the darkness, was a symbol of the interconnectedness of all souls, living and dead, and the shared responsibility they had to maintain the order of the universe. This understanding of death, as a continuation of the soul's nightly journey, explains the specific elements of Egyptian burial, the use of the Findi Book of the Dead, and the rituals that ensured a smooth transition into the afterlife. The ultimate journey, just like the nightly passage through the Duat, was not unknown or mysterious. It was a familiar continuation of the cosmic struggle, a journey the soul had been preparing for every time it slept. The Sidi Book of the Dead is often thought of as a funerary text, created solely for the dead to navigate the afterlife. However, this narrow understanding of the Tidi Book of the Dead misses a crucial and revolutionary aspect. It was also a guidebook for the living, a manual for surviving the nightly journey through the Duat. The Egyptians didn't see sleep as a simple biological necessity, or a time of unconsciousness. It was an active, dangerous, and spiritually significant journey into the cosmic realm. As a result, many spells in the 50 Book of the Dead weren't just for the deceased. They were for anyone preparing to enter the realm of sleep each night. A careful examination of the 12 Book of the Dead reveals numerous spells that apply directly to the experiences of sleeping souls. These spells weren't just for those who had passed on. They were essential tools for navigating the dangers of the Duat every night. For instance, there are spells for passing through the gates of the Duat, for navigating perilous waters, for transforming into different forms, like a bird, a snake, or a lotus, and for invoking powerful names to protect the soul. These were not merely abstract rituals for the afterlife. They were practical, everyday tools for safely navigating the unseen world of sleep and dreams. Wealthy Egyptians understood this connection and took it seriously. Many of them commissioned personalized copies of the Findi Book of the Dead during their lifetime, not as a morbid obsession with death, but as a practical manual for surviving each night. These personalized versions were consulted regularly, just as one might consult a religious text for guidance. The Sidi Book of the Dead was as much a part of daily life as it was a part of the funerary process. This practice was not limited to the elite, though even illiterate Egyptians, who couldn't read the text themselves, relied on scribes to read the protective spells to them at bedtime. This made the Findi Book of the Dead a nightly security system, not just a guide for death. Archaeological evidence supports this. Many copies of the Tindi Book of the Dead have been found in homes rather than tombs. These copies show signs of regular use, with worn edges, annotations, and even marginal notes, indicating that the texts were actively consulted during life. Fragments of the Fudi Book of the Dead have been discovered in private homes, suggesting that this text was not just a one-time affair for burial. It was part of an ongoing relationship between the living and the divine. One fascinating aspect of the Fudi Book of the Dead is the practice of dream study. Just as priests studied sacred texts for their temple duties, ordinary Egyptians studied the Fidi Book of the Dead as preparation for sleep. This practice involved regular reading, memorization, and recitation of the spells, preparing the soul for the nightly journey through the Duat. These nightly rituals became as important as any priestly duties, ensuring that the soul was fully prepared for the dangers that lay in wait during sleep. Some spells exist in both night and death versions, slightly different in wording depending on whether the soul was undertaking a temporary journey during sleep or a permanent journey after death. This duality reflects the Egyptians' view that the nightly passage through the Duat was, in many ways, a rehearsal for the final passage into the afterlife. By mastering these spells during life, an individual would effectively be training for their eternal journey, making the transition from life to death smoother and more seamless. In this sense, sleep was a continuous practice, an ongoing training session for the ultimate journey that would come at the end of life. The class implications of this practice are significant. Wealthy Egyptians had access to full, comprehensive 30 books of the dead, complete with a wide array of spells for protection and guidance. In contrast, poorer Egyptians often had only abbreviated versions or relied on oral traditions. Despite these disparities, the belief in the Fidi Book of the Dead as a tool for navigating the spiritual realm during sleep was widespread. Everyone, regardless of their social standing, had access to some form of guidance for the nightly journey. This practice of using the Fidi Book of the Dead for daily sleep and spiritual protection revolutionizes our understanding of the text. It was not just a funerary manual, it was a living document, actively consulted and used throughout life. The Signy Book of the Dead helped guide people through the trials of sleep, just as it helped guide them through the final journey of death. By recontextualizing the Signy Book of the Dead as a tool for the living, we gain a deeper understanding of how the ancient Egyptians saw their relationship to the divine, the afterlife, and their daily lives. The revolutionary implication here is that everything we thought we knew about the Signy Book of the Dead needs reconsideration. It was not simply a preparation for death, but a practical guide for navigating the dangers of the night, and thus the text has far broader relevance than previously understood. The Signy Book of the Dead was a manual for the living, designed to ensure safe passage through the duat every night, with the ultimate goal of ensuring that the soul could continue its cosmic journey without interruption. This rethinking of the Signy Book of the Dead leads us to ask which specific spells were most important for nightly use. How did these spells work in practice to guide and protect the sleeping soul? The answers to these questions reveal practical details about how Egyptians understood their nightly journey and how they navigated their dreams. Understanding these spells offers insight into the daily rituals and beliefs that were central to Egyptian life and gives us a deeper appreciation for the complexity of their spiritual system. The Signy Book of the Dead was not only a manual for the afterlife, but also a guide for the living to navigate their nightly journeys through the duat. The spells contained within the text served as practical tools to ensure the safe passage of the soul through the realm of sleep, where dangers abounded. These spells were not abstract or arbitrary. They were deeply connected to the personal experiences of the sleeping soul. In particular, certain spells from the Signy Book of the Dead were especially relevant for those preparing to travel through the duat each night. One of the most critical types of spells in this context were transformation spells. The Egyptians believed that during sleep, the soul could take on various forms to navigate the dangers of the duat. Dreams of flying as a bird, swimming as a fish, or changing into other creatures were seen as signs of successful application of these spells. For example, spells 76 to 88 in the Signy Book of the Dead granted the soul the ability to transform into animals or objects, each suited for specific regions of the duat. Some forms provided protection, while others allowed the soul to access areas that would otherwise be blocked. Transforming into a bird, for instance, might help the soul fly over treacherous waters or pass through difficult to navigate regions of the duat. These transformations weren't just symbolic, they were seen as literal abilities the soul had during its nightly journey. Another set of essential spells in the Signy Book of the Dead addressed the need to pass through the various guardians or gatekeepers that blocked access to different regions of the duat. These gatekeepers were often formidable entities who required the correct passwords or names to allow the soul passage. These spells weren't arbitrary. Knowing the correct incantation or divine name was necessary for safe passage. Dreams in which a sleeper finds themselves blocked, unable to proceed, or confronted by guardians were interpreted as failures to apply these essential spells. The inability to pass a gatekeeper in a dream was viewed as a failure to properly know the necessary magical words, potentially leaving the soul stranded in the duat. Protection spells were another crucial component of the Signy Book of the Dead, especially against specific threats the soul might face. For example, spell 31 was designed to prevent the crocodile from taking the heart, while spells 32 to 34 were used to drive away serpents. These spells directly corresponded to common fears and threats in the duat, and recurring nightmares involving particular creatures might indicate that the sleeper needed to memorize and use the relevant protective spell. Other spells, such as spells 35 to 41, were aimed at preventing various forms of death or harm in the duat, ensuring that the soul remained safe from the forces of chaos. These protective spells were central to ensuring that the soul could survive the nightly journey and return safely to the body. One of the most profound fears Egyptians had about their nightly journeys was losing their identity in the chaos of the duat. This fear is addressed in several spells, including those aimed at preventing the soul's name from being forgotten or its heart from testifying against it. Spells designed to maintain identity were crucial for ensuring that the soul could re-enter the body each morning. The The fear of losing one's name or essence was directly tied to the existential belief that the soul's identity must remain intact for the cosmic order to be preserved. These spells were particularly important for ensuring that the soul could find its way back to the body at dawn, fully intact and capable of returning to its waking life. One of the most important spells in this context is spell 125, the negative confession. This spell was recited not only at the time of death, but also before sleep, as a way of preparing the soul for the nightly weighing. By declaring all the wrongs one had not committed, the individual could lighten their heart and prepare for the nightly cosmic judgment. The 30 negative confession was a form of spiritual purification, ensuring that the soul was free from the weight of guilt or misdeeds before embarking on its journey. This practice, much like the daily rituals of purification, was designed to ensure the soul's readiness for the trials of the due-out. Another critical set of spells were memory spells, which helped ensure that the soul remembered its identity, the location of its body, and the way home. Dreams of confusion, disorientation, or being lost in an unfamiliar space were interpreted as failures of these memory spells. The soul, during sleep, had to maintain a clear connection to the physical world and to its own identity, and these spells were designed to ensure that this connection remained intact. If a sleeper found themselves unable to remember where they were or who they were, it was seen as a sign that these memory spells had failed, leaving the soul vulnerable in the duat. Some spells in the Thudi Book of the Dead were considered too powerful or dangerous for nightly use. These spells were reserved for the final death journey, when the soul was seeking permanent transformation or ultimate protection. These potent spells, intended for permanent journeys through the duat, were not meant for the temporary nightly travels of the soul. However, for the living, there were plenty of less powerful but highly practical spells available to ensure safe passage through the duat each night. The Thudi Book of the Dead was not a text for the afterlife alone. It was a guidebook for every night. Its spells were designed to protect, guide, and prepare the soul for its nightly journey, ensuring that each night's passage would be as successful as possible. These spells for sleeping souls worked just as effectively for the living as they did for the dead, because the Egyptians believed the soul's journey during sleep was essentially the same as its journey after death. The difference was simple. The living had the privilege of returning to the body each morning, while the dead stayed aboard Ra-'s bark permanently. In conclusion, the Thudi Book of the Dead served as a powerful manual for the living to navigate their nightly passage through the duat. The spells it contained were practical tools for survival, ensuring that the soul could pass through guardians, transform into necessary forms, protect itself from dangerous creatures, and maintain its identity. Understanding these spells allows us to see the Thudi Book of the Dead in a completely new light, not just as a funerary text, but as a living guide to the journey of the soul, helping it navigate the same cosmic forces that guided it after death. This nightly journey was a rehearsal for eternity, and mastering the spells in the Thudi Book of the Dead meant that the soul was prepared for both the temporary journey of sleep and the final, eternal journey of death. In ancient Egypt, the understanding of sleep as a rehearsal for death fundamentally shaped how the Egyptians viewed mortality. Death was not a frightening, unknown experience to be feared, but rather a familiar journey they had taken countless times during their lives. The Egyptians believed that each night of sleep was a miniature death, an opportunity for the soul to practice for the ultimate journey. When death finally arrived, it was simply the final step in a process that had been rehearsed thousands of times. This profound view of sleep as death rehearsal created a psychological and spiritual comfort that fundamentally altered how Egyptians faced the end of life. The Egyptians had a unique perspective on the idea of death readiness. Because they believed that the soul journeyed through the duat every night, they calculated how many times an individual had already traversed this realm by the time they died. A 50-year-old Egyptian would have made approximately 18,000 nightly journeys through the duat, while a child, with fewer years of life, would have travelled through it far less. This calculation was not just abstract, it had practical implications for burial practices. Since older individuals had practiced the journey many more times, they were seen as more prepared for the eternal journey. Therefore, their burial provisions could be simpler. In contrast, Children, with their limited experience, were buried with additional protective amulets and guidance to ensure their souls could safely navigate the duat, which they had not yet travelled through enough to be fully prepared. This system of belief provided immense comfort to the living. The Egyptians didn't view death as a terrifying leap into the unknown, but as the next logical step in an already familiar journey. Each successful awakening from sleep proved that the soul had navigated the duat successfully and returned to the body. Therefore, the Egyptians reasoned, navigating the duat permanently, without returning to the body, should be just as manageable. The Thidi Book of the Dedi, which might seem to be a guide exclusively for the afterlife, was seen as a review of lessons learned from thousands of nights of practice. Egyptians also kept detailed dream journals, recording their nightly experiences as a way to track their progress and gain expertise in navigating the duat. People who had vivid, controlled dreams and could describe the geography of the duat were considered especially prepared for death. For some, the final years of life were devoted to perfecting their ability to navigate dreams, almost as if they were training for their final journey. The elderly often focused intensely on dream practice, using it to gain spiritual clarity and ensure they could navigate the duat with confidence when the time came for them to make the permanent journey. The tragedy of untimely death, especially among the young, was viewed through this lens as particularly profound. The death of a child was not only a loss of life, but also a loss of potential experience in navigating the duat. A young soul, not having had the time to accumulate sufficient practice, was not yet ready for the eternal journey. This belief made death a more poignant and tragic experience, because the deceased had not had the opportunity to rehearse enough for the final journey. This perspective also framed the concept of sleep disorders and insomnia as a serious concern. For the Egyptians, an inability to sleep wasn't just a health issue. It was a spiritual problem, as it meant the soul had not been able to practice its nightly journey. In essence, sleep disorders were seen as an impediment to preparing for the most important journey of all, the journey to the afterlife. This belief system even influenced how the dying approached their final moments. Some individuals who were nearing death requested to be kept in dream-like states or to be surrounded by an environment conducive to sleep. This request was not an attempt to avoid death, but rather to make the transition as seamless as possible. They hoped that by staying in a dream-like state, their death would feel like a natural continuation of the nightly journey through the duat, rather than a jarring, unknown experience. The Suti Book of the Dedi, then, was not just a guide for the dead. It was a comprehensive review of lessons learned over a lifetime of nightly practice. It was not a cheat sheet for an exam that one had never studied for, but a tool for reinforcing the knowledge and wisdom that had already been accumulated through years of daily preparation. This practice of nightly death rehearsal gave the Egyptians a sense of control over their mortality, transforming death from a terrifying mystery into the next logical step in a journey they had been preparing for all their lives. This deep integration of sleep with death allowed the Egyptians to approach mortality with a sense of confidence and familiarity. It wasn't about avoiding death, but about preparing for it, as one would prepare for any important journey, through constant practice and mastery of the necessary skills. In the Egyptian worldview, sleep was the ultimate preparation for death, and the mastery of one's nightly journey was the key to navigating the final journey with ease. This holistic system of spiritual practice, treating every night as a rehearsal for the final journey, offers a profound insight into how the Egyptians viewed their place in the cosmos. Life, death, and sleep were all connected in a continuous cyclical process, and understanding this connection gave the Egyptians a deeper sense of purpose, meaning, and peace in the face of mortality. With this understanding, death was not an end but a natural familiar transition, the final step in a journey the soul had taken countless times before. In ancient Egypt, the practice of dream incubation was far from an esoteric or elite tradition. It was a widespread and institutionalized phenomenon. People from all walks of life sought divine guidance, healing, and prophecy through dreams, and temples were the sanctuaries where this practice took place. These sacred spaces weren't just places for daytime worship or ritual. They were powerful gateways to the divine, where souls could safely traverse the duat and meet gods halfway in the dark. Dream incubation was a formalized, structured process that involved sleeping in sacred spaces to receive dreams that were believed to offer direct communication with the divine. Archaeological evidence supports the existence of dream incubation in ancient Egyptian temples. Sleeping chambers attached to temples have been discovered, suggesting that temples were specifically designed to accommodate those seeking dreams of divine significance. Inscriptions have been found recording the success of dream consultations, as well as votive offerings left in gratitude for prophetic visions or healing experiences. These findings reveal that the practice wasn't rare or reserved for the wealthy or elite. Ordinary Egyptians also participated in dream incubation, seeking divine intervention or guidance for a variety of personal and societal concerns. The process of dream incubation in temples followed a specific sequence of steps. First, petitioners underwent a purification ritual, which might include washing, fasting, or other cleansing practices to ensure they approached the divine in a state of spiritual readiness. Afterward, they would make offerings to the gods, often including food, incense, or precious items, as an act of devotion and a way of requesting favor. Priests played an essential role in the ritual, offering preliminary prayers and blessings to prepare the petitioner for the dream experience. Once the preparations were complete, the petitioner would sleep in a designated sacred space, often in close proximity to cult statues or sacred symbols that were thought to facilitate divine communication. The goals of dream incubation were varied, and petitioners sought dreams for a range of purposes. One of the most common requests was healing. Many people came to temples seeking dreams that could provide divine cures or diagnostic information for physical or mental illnesses. Dreams were believed to hold the power to reveal the root causes of ailments or to provide visions of healing, either through divine intervention or instructions for medicinal remedies. In addition to healing, people sought guidance on life decisions, such as marriage, business, legal disputes, and personal relationships. Dreams were also considered valuable sources of prophetic knowledge, especially regarding critical issues like the coming harvests, pregnancies, or even political events. The information received in these dreams was not only seen as divine guidance, but as an essential tool for making decisions that affected the welfare of individuals, families, and even communities. Certain temples specialized in specific types of dream consultations, depending on the god to whom the temple was dedicated. For example, temples dedicated to Hathor, the goddess of love, fertility, and healing, were particularly known for offering healing dreams. Those seeking prophetic dreams, especially related to knowledge of the future or divine will, would travel to temples dedicated to Thoth, the god of wisdom and writing. Likewise, temples dedicated to Marat, the goddess of justice and order, were consulted for guidance on legal matters. This specialization created a system where individuals could seek out the appropriate divine expertise for their needs, making the practice of dream incubation an organized and accessible service. The success of dream incubation was often recorded and celebrated. Inscriptions from petitioners expressing gratitude to the gods for accurate dream predictions have been uncovered, as have medical case studies where dream diagnoses proved to be correct. Administrative records also indicate that some decisions, whether in personal, familial, or even political spheres, were based on the results of temple dream consultations. These documented success stories demonstrate the high regard in which dream incubation was held and the real-world impact it had on the lives of individuals and communities. Dream priests played an essential role in facilitating the incubation process. They were responsible for preparing the sacred space, performing protective rituals to ensure the safety of the soul during its journey through the duat, interpreting the resulting dreams, and prescribing follow-up actions based on the messages received. Dream incubation wasn't simply about having a vision. It required careful guidance and interpretation by skilled priests who understood the language of the gods and the significance of dreams in the spiritual framework of Egyptian belief. The practice of dream incubation could span multiple nights if the initial dreams were unclear or incomplete. Petitioners might return to the temple for several consecutive nights, sleeping in the sacred space until they received a dream that provided the guidance or answers they sought. The length of time spent in a temple undergoing incubation reflected the seriousness of the request and the commitment to receiving divine communication. Economically, dream incubation became a thriving industry in ancient Egypt. Fees for dream incubation suggest that it was a professional service provided by temples, creating an economic exchange for the consultation of dreams. These fees would have included payment for the use of the sacred space, the services of the priests, and the votive offerings made in gratitude for divine revelations. Temples, therefore, were not only spiritual centers but also important economic hubs, offering a unique service that combined both spiritual and practical benefits for the Egyptian population. Temples were understood as particularly safe points of access to the duat, with sacred architecture designed to create protected passages for the soul. These sacred spaces were thought to provide a greater chance of divine contact, with fewer risks and distractions compared to the potentially dangerous open spaces of everyday life. The temple's role as safe duat access points made them central to the practice of dream incubation, offering individuals a protected environment where they could safely traverse the realm of sleep and interact with the divine. Additionally, there was evidence of what might be considered dream tourism in ancient Egypt. People would travel significant distances to sleep in particularly famous or powerful temples, seeking the divine guidance or healing that was promised by the practice of dream incubation. Just as pilgrims in other parts of the world today travel to sacred sites for spiritual benefits, ancient Egyptians traveled to specific temples that had built reputations for offering powerful and accurate dreams. This dream tourism underscores the widespread significance of dream incubation and its integration into the cultural and religious practices of the time. In conclusion, the practice of dream incubation in temples was a deeply ingrained, institutionalized practice that was accessible to people from all walks of life. Temples provided a sacred, protected space where individuals could seek divine guidance, healing, and prophecy through their dreams. The practice was not only about spiritual fulfillment, but also had practical implications, as dreams were used to guide life decisions, ensure health, and predict the future. Dream priests played a vital role in facilitating the process, and the success of dream incubation was documented in inscriptions and records, showing the tangible effects of these consultations on the lives of individuals and communities. Dream incubation in temples was an essential part of Egyptian religious and spiritual life, offering an avenue for divine communication and guidance that extended well beyond the afterlife. In ancient Egypt, dreams weren't just individual experiences to be analyzed in solitude. They were deeply embedded in family and community life. Ordinary Egyptians integrated dream wisdom into their daily routines, viewing dreams not only as personal revelations, but as vital tools for practical decision-making and spiritual guidance. Dreams were taken seriously, with entire families often discussing them over meals and using them as a framework for shaping the day's actions and decisions. One of the most common practices was dream sharing. It wasn't unusual for families to sit down together after breakfast and recount their dreams from the night before. This collective analysis often influenced daily activities, with members adjusting their plans based on the content of their dreams. A dream of a successful harvest, for example, might lead to optimistic planning for business or agriculture, while a dream of an ominous animal could signal the need for caution or avoidance of certain actions. The practice of sharing dreams was not just an informal habit, but an integral part of household decision-making, grounded in the belief that dreams provided direct insight into the spiritual world. Some dreams were seen as requiring specific actions. Certain dreams might prompt individuals to make offerings to particular gods, avoid certain activities, or consult local priests for further interpretation. These actions were believed to influence not only the outcome of the dreamer's day, but also their long-term fate. For example, if someone dreamed of a specific deity, offerings were made to that god, sometimes at small household shrines or altars. These shrines were places where family members could pray for protection before sleep, thank deities for favorable dreams, or make requests for guidance and blessings. These household shrines were thus integral to the intersection of daily life and spiritual practice, serving as both a spiritual and practical tool. Parents played a crucial role in the education of their children about the world of dreams. Children were taught about duat geography, the realms and entities the soul would encounter in its nightly journey, and how to behave while traveling through these realms. Dream-related teachings, including protective spells and the proper way to navigate the spiritual world during sleep, were considered essential life skills. This education began at an early age, ensuring that children understood the importance of dreams and how to interpret them for guidance and protection. In this way, The act of teaching dream wisdom was part of a larger educational system within the home. For literate families, dreams were even recorded in dream journals, where papyri fragments might document dreams with dates, interpretations, and outcomes. These journals functioned as records, tracking the accuracy of dream guidance over time, and allowing families to assess the efficacy of the spiritual advice they had received. This practice further highlights how dreams were not just personal, but were part of a family's spiritual and practical life. In some households, there were specific family members, often grandmothers or older aunts, who became recognized as dream specialists. These individuals were consulted before formal priestly intervention and were often entrusted with interpreting dreams for the family. Their reputation as skilled interpreters of the spiritual realm made them invaluable sources of guidance. Their interpretations were seen as a way to understand the deeper meaning behind dreams, particularly those that were troubling or difficult to understand. Dream-based medicine was another important aspect of household dream practices. Certain ailments were diagnosed through dreams rather than physical symptoms. Dreams might reveal internal conditions or spiritual imbalances that could not be detected through ordinary means. In such cases, dream specialists or household healers would rely on the guidance received in dreams to offer treatment. This belief underscores how dreams were intertwined with the Egyptians' understanding of health, spirituality, and the body, and how spiritual guidance was considered just as valid as medical diagnosis. When multiple family members experienced disturbing dreams on the same night, it was often seen as a sign of spiritual contamination affecting the household. In these cases, collective purification rituals were performed. These rituals were intended to cleanse the household and ensure that the spiritual health of the family was restored. Such practices reveal that the Egyptians didn't view dreams as isolated occurrences, but as part of a larger system of spiritual balance that affected the whole family. The practice of dream preparation for children was particularly important. Protective amulets, often made specifically for young sleepers, were placed on children to shield them from spiritual dangers during the night. Simplified prayers were also taught to children, helping them to call upon protective deities before sleep. In many cases, children slept near their parents or other family members, as the Egyptians believed that co-sleeping arrangements protected children's inexperienced souls. This practice ensured that the younger members of the family were shielded from any harmful spiritual influences during their nightly journeys. Dreams played such an integral role in everyday Egyptian life that they even influenced major life decisions. Marriages, business partnerships, and relocations were sometimes delayed or accelerated based on the guidance received through dreams. For instance, if a person dreamed of a favorable omen related to a potential marriage or business venture, they might move forward with it. Conversely, a troubling dream might cause them to hesitate or reconsider. This practice highlights how dreams were not only spiritual in nature, but also practical, guiding people in making life choices that affected their future. Finally, the Egyptians believed that a family's spiritual health could be monitored through collective dream patterns. Persistent nightmares across multiple family members were seen as an indication that something was wrong spiritually and might signal the need for professional spiritual intervention. Such patterns indicated that the household was under spiritual duress and needed guidance or cleansing from a priest or other spiritual authority. The Egyptian approach to dreams was rooted in community, family, and interconnectedness. Dreams were not considered private matters, but were seen as collective concerns that shaped the decisions, actions, and spiritual well-being of the entire family. By integrating dream wisdom into everyday life, the Egyptians created a system where sleep and the duat were viewed as essential components of living in balance with both the physical and spiritual worlds. This holistic view of dreams, where they were part of both the private and communal realms, offers insight into how deeply intertwined spirituality was with daily existence in ancient Egypt. Understanding these household practices reveals that Egyptian life operated on two parallel tracks, the waking world and the duat. Each night, Egyptians navigated both worlds simultaneously, ensuring that their souls were prepared for the nightly journey and that their waking life was informed by spiritual wisdom. This dual existence was foundational to their worldview, where dreams and reality were in constant interplay, guiding decisions and shaping the fabric of life itself. The ancient Egyptians lived with a profound understanding that their existence was not confined to the waking world alone. They experienced a simultaneous double life, one in the physical realm during the day, and another in the duat, the spiritual and cosmic realm they entered every night through sleep. This dual existence was not something they viewed as separate or compartmentalized. Both worlds were considered equally real, equally important, and constantly interwoven, influencing each other in ways that shaped their culture, religion, ethics, and worldview. This dual life influenced almost every aspect of Egyptian life. Their architecture was designed not just for the living, but also for the souls of the dead, ensuring that the space served both waking and sleeping souls. Temples, tombs, and homes were constructed to accommodate the needs of both realms, with specific rooms dedicated to rest and rejuvenation, allowing souls to traverse the duat as part of their cyclical existence. Art, too, reflected this dual reality. It depicted both the activities of the living world and the soul's journey through the duat, capturing a sense of continuity between the two dimensions. Religion in Egypt was not compartmentalized into daytime worship and nighttime dreams. Instead, Egyptians understood their religious practices as a continuous thread, with daytime worship offering honor to the gods, while nighttime navigation involved aligning oneself with divine will in the duat. Medical practices didn't solely focus on curing physical ailments, but also took into account the health of the soul, diagnosing spiritual conditions and treating the soul's journey through dreams. This was especially evident in the practice of dream incubation, where dreams served as diagnostic tools, providing insight into both physical and soul-related health. Law, too, sometimes incorporated dream testimony. Dreams weren't simply personal visions, they were seen as messages from the divine, and in some cases, dream experiences or interpretations could influence legal decisions. Ethics were influenced by the moral accounting carried out every night. The heart was weighed, ensuring that individuals lived in accordance with marat, truth, balance, and justice. Thus, moral conduct wasn't just evaluated in waking hours, but was part of an ongoing process that extended into the spiritual realm, ensuring that individuals were held accountable, not just during the day but throughout the night. The idea of identity itself in ancient Egypt was profoundly shaped by this dual existence. You weren't just a person in the waking world, you were a complex being comprising multiple soul components, such as the Pudi Kaf, life force, Tibai personality, spiritual transformation, and others. These components all existed simultaneously in both realms, the physical and the duat, creating a multifaceted and interconnected sense of self. Your complete identity spanned both worlds, and your soul was a traveler, moving between them as part of the cosmic cycle. For the Egyptians, waking and sleeping weren't opposites, as we often perceive them. Instead, they were complementary states of being. Waking life was essential for carrying out daily duties, while sleep was equally necessary for the soul's growth and interaction with the divine. Neither world was more real than the other. Both were equally vital to a complete existence. In this way, Egyptian consciousness wasn't limited to just physical reality. It was a consciousness that navigated two realms at once, with both experiences feeding into and enriching each other. This understanding of the dual nature of existence allowed the Egyptians to create a culture that was both practical and mystical. It was practical because nightly experiences in the duat provided diagnostic, prophetic, and therapeutic information that influenced decisions in the waking world. But it was also mystical, as every experience was infused with deeper spiritual significance. Every dream had the potential to carry divine meaning, and every night's sleep was an opportunity for cosmic service. This worldview provided a deeply meaningful framework for life, where suffering had purpose, soul development, death was seen as a continuation of life rather than an end, and every action was part of a much larger, interconnected cosmic process. This system of thought was psychologically sophisticated. It provided daily spiritual practice, sleep preparation, regular moral accounting, the nightly weighing of the heart, and continuous opportunities for spiritual growth, mastering the navigation of the duat. Death was not an unknown, frightening event, but a familiar transition, the culmination of an ongoing journey through the duat that had been rehearsed each night of life. Modern scholars often try to separate religion from secular life in ancient cultures, but the Egyptian worldview didn't recognize such a division. Religion wasn't just an aspect of life, it was life itself, embedded in the way they lived, slept, worked, and interacted with the world. For the Egyptians, the duat wasn't a religious concept in the way we might think of afterlife beliefs today. It was their understanding of actual reality, one they lived in and experienced daily. In this light, to fully understand ancient Egyptian art, architecture, religion, or society, we must understand their beliefs about sleep and the duat. These beliefs were the underlying structure of their consciousness itself, shaping their daily lives and their most profound spiritual practices. Just as we understand the world through our waking experiences, the Egyptians understood theirs through both waking and sleeping, living and dying simultaneously. The duat wasn't some distant mythological realm. It was as real to them as the physical world they inhabited. It was a place they visited every single night, as familiar as our own bedrooms, and just as essential to their existence. This realization gives us a powerful insight into how the ancient Egyptians perceived life, death, and everything in between. They didn't fear death because they knew it well. They had been rehearsing for it every single night. This duality of consciousness, living in two worlds at once, created a culture that was both deeply practical and profoundly mystical, a culture that integrated all aspects of existence into a seamless cosmic whole. And perhaps there are lessons for us in their worldview about how we might reconnect with our own deeper spiritual practices, embrace the mysteries of sleep and dreams, and see death not as an end, but as a continuation of the journey. As we move toward the final chapter, we will explore the modern relevance of Egyptian attitudes towards sleep, dreams, and consciousness. What can we learn from their integration of the physical and spiritual realms? And how might we reclaim the wisdom they possessed about the night? In modern societies, we face a sleep crisis. Insomnia, sleep disorders, and widespread sleep deprivation have reached epidemic levels, with millions of people struggling to get a good night's rest. Despite the scientific advancements in understanding sleep, such as measuring REM cycles, identifying neurotransmitters, and mapping brain waves, the fundamental issue remains: people aren't sleeping well. This discrepancy raises an important question. Could we have lost something essential about sleep that the ancient Egyptians knew? Looking through the lens of Egyptian beliefs about sleep, we can see that modern sleep problems might not just be biological or physiological, they could be spiritual or psychological in nature, as the Egyptians understood. The Egyptians didn't treat sleep issues as medical problems in the way we do today. Instead, they believed sleep was an essential spiritual journey that required preparation, protection, and respect. The Egyptians viewed sleep as a time when the soul traveled through the duat, the realm of the gods and the dead, and they believed that failure to prepare for this nightly journey could result in various spiritual disturbances, which, in their view, manifested as physical and psychological symptoms. In modern terms, insomnia might be understood by the Egyptians as a fifimbar, the soul's personality or essence that is too restless to return to the body, or as a finka, the life force that is weak and unable to find its way home. Sleep paralysis, where a person feels unable to move upon waking, could be seen as a fondaka, attempting to follow the thivenbas too vigorously, perhaps pushing too hard to rejoin the body. Nightmares, according to Egyptian beliefs, might be attributed to unprotected exposure to hostile regions of the duat, where malevolent spirits or chaotic forces could harm the soul. Sleep apnea, interrupted breathing during sleep, might be interpreted as the soul's journey being disrupted, halting the fidibai and aund kai, and return to the body. Chronic fatigue, especially among people who seem to get enough sleep but still feel exhausted, could be understood as the result of difficult nightly navigation without proper spiritual preparation or protection, leaving the soul drained after its journey. The Egyptian worldview offers a different approach to these modern sleep issues, one that focuses not just on physical conditions, but also on the soul's health. While we may not literally believe in the Findafiba or the Duat today, the Egyptians' understanding that sleep requires preparation, protection, and reverence offers valuable insights into how we might address modern sleep problems. When we treat sleep as merely a biological process, focusing on its physiological aspects, we overlook the deeper psychological and spiritual dimensions that the Egyptians intuitively understood. Interestingly, modern sleep hygiene practices echo many of the protective measures the Egyptians used for a good night's rest. Recommendations like keeping the room dark, establishing a regular bedtime routine, creating a relaxing environment, and protecting oneself from external disruptions mirror the Egyptian practices of making offerings, performing rituals, and creating a protected sacred space for the soul to rest. These similarities suggest that the Egyptians had an intuitive understanding of the environmental and psychological conditions necessary for healthy sleep, which modern science has only recently begun to formalize. Perhaps most importantly, the Egyptian approach to sleep regarded it as a meaningful and sacred experience, not just a time to rest the body. Sleep was a journey, a cosmic participation in the rhythms of the universe, and every night of sleep was viewed as a practice run for the ultimate transformation at death. This stands in contrast to the modern view, where sleep is often treated as a biological need with little deeper meaning. In modern psychology, dreams are seen as a process of integration and meaning-making, a way for the unconscious to work through unresolved emotions or experiences. In many ways, this echoes the Egyptian concept of the soul's nightly work during sleep, as it traversed the duat, facing challenges, receiving guidance, and seeking transformation. This understanding of sleep as a journey, not just a biological function, suggests that modern sleep problems may not only be the result of physiological imbalances, but also of a lack of reverence for sleep's deeper purpose. The Egyptians treated sleep with intention and ritual, seeing it as an opportunity for growth, healing, and spiritual practice. Today, this sense of reverence is often missing. Instead of treating sleep as a spiritual practice, we often treat it as an inconvenience or a necessary but mundane part of life. If we could learn from the Egyptians, we might approach sleep differently, not just as a means to recover physically, but as an opportunity to heal, to grow, and to participate in the ongoing cosmic processes that govern our lives. Approaching sleep with intention and reverence, rather than simply focusing on biological solutions, could help address modern sleep issues more holistically. Perhaps we need to reintegrate some of these ancient practices, updated for contemporary understanding, to create the conditions necessary for restful and meaningful sleep. In addition to practical rituals, the ancient Egyptians also embraced the idea that not all nights would bring peaceful rest. They accepted that sometimes the soul had to do difficult work in the duat, facing challenges and overcoming obstacles. This acceptance, rather than fear, of restless nights could offer a modern insight. Anxiety about not sleeping may, in itself, exacerbate the problem. Just as the Egyptians understood that some nights required soul work, modern individuals could benefit from understanding that poor sleep might sometimes be part of a larger process, not something to be feared or avoided at all costs. In this way, the Egyptians' acceptance of the duality of the human experience, waking and sleeping, offers a refreshing perspective on how we might approach our own sleep struggles. By reconsidering sleep in the context of ancient Egyptian wisdom, we might find a deeper, more meaningful way to address our modern sleep crisis. This doesn't mean we need to adopt ancient beliefs literally, but we can take inspiration from their holistic understanding of sleep as a profound, integral part of human existence, one that connects the physical and spiritual realms. In doing so, we can regain the balance between biological health and spiritual well-being and approach sleep as the sacred and transformative experience it was always meant to be. This section sets the stage for the next part of our exploration: how modern people can adopt insights from ancient Egyptian sleep practices, blending old wisdom with contemporary knowledge to create a more complete, integrated approach to rest, recovery, and spiritual health. In examining ancient Egyptian beliefs about sleep, we uncover valuable insights that modern people can incorporate into their own sleep practices, even without subscribing to literal supernatural beliefs. The Egyptians viewed sleep not as an unconscious shutdown, but as a sacred process, a transformative journey through the duat. This concept provides a refreshing perspective on how we might approach rest today. By adopting some of their wisdom, we can enrich our nightly routines, create more meaningful transitions from wakefulness to sleep, and ultimately improve our overall well-being. One of the key Egyptian insights is the idea that sleep is sacred. They approached bedtime with ritualistic intentionality, and modern bedtime routines could greatly benefit from incorporating similar elements. Rather than simply collapsing into bed at the end of the day, modern individuals might consider adopting a more deliberate transition from day to night. This could include setting aside daily concerns, consciously preparing the sleep environment and engaging in calming rituals that mark the shift from waking life to the restful, sacred time of sleep. Simple actions, such as dimming the lights, turning off electronics, or engaging in a brief mindfulness practice, called mirror the Egyptian tradition of preparing oneself for a journey into the night. Another important insight from Egyptian sleep beliefs is the idea of protecting one's identity during sleep. The Egyptians understood that sleep was a vulnerable state where the soul might wander into the duat, and they took steps to safeguard it. Similarly, modern people could benefit from creating boundaries around their sleep environment, protecting sleep from interruption by silencing phones, locking doors, or ensuring a quiet, undisturbed space can foster a sense of security. More than just physical boundaries, the Egyptians also recognized the importance of protecting the mind. This could translate into modern practices such as keeping a worry journal, engaging in next-day planning before bed, or using relaxation techniques to release anxieties before sleep. Just as the Egyptians believed the soul needed protection, so too does the modern mind need safeguards from the stresses and distractions of daily life. In a similar vein, the Egyptian belief in multiple aspects of the self, the poi di, kai, and bi, and so on, suggests that we are more than just one unified identity. While we need not believe in these soul components literally, the idea that our personality, life force, emotions, and identity require different forms of care during sleep can be a valuable framework for modern sleep practices. Acknowledging that different parts of ourselves might need different forms of rest and rejuvenation during sleep can help us approach rest more holistically. This might mean prioritizing emotional rest, practicing self-compassion, or engaging in activities that nourish our mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, even in our sleep. The Egyptians also paid close attention to dreams, not necessarily through elaborate interpretations, but by honoring them as meaningful. This practice offers a useful takeaway for modern life. Rather than dismissing dreams as random brain activity, we might benefit from recognizing their potential significance. Taking the time to record meaningful dreams, reflect on their content, and consider how they might inform our waking lives can deepen our understanding of ourselves. Dreams could be treated as a source of guidance or insight, just as the Egyptians viewed them as messages from the divine. Perhaps one of the most striking concepts in Egyptian sleep beliefs is the idea that sleep was a rehearsal for death. While this might feel uncomfortable from a modern perspective, the underlying psychological insight is powerful. Recognizing that sleep is not merely a biological process, but a practice of transition, just as we prepare for the unknown journey of death, can help alleviate anxiety about the natural cycle of life. Viewing sleep as a transformation or a journey can shift how we approach bedtime, allowing us to treat it with more reverence and intentionality. The act of preparing for sleep with this understanding, whether through rituals, prayers, or a mindful attitude, can create a sense of comfort and control over an otherwise mysterious and uncontrollable part of life. The Egyptians also understood the importance of boundaries and protection during sleep. While their use of amulets and spells may seem far removed from modern sensibilities, the deeper wisdom about the need for protective structures around vulnerable states holds merit today. Whether through literal protection, like locks, safe spaces, and sleep-only bedrooms, or psychological measures that foster a sense of security, the need for boundaries around sleep is just as relevant. Creating an environment where we feel safe, physically and mentally, enhances our ability to rest deeply and rejuvenate. Another vital aspect of Egyptian sleep wisdom is the concept of cosmic participation. In the Egyptian worldview, every night's sleep was a meaningful journey, a chance to participate in the cosmic order, whether by fighting chaos or navigating the duat. Modern people can similarly find meaning in their sleep by connecting it to larger patterns, cycles, or contributions to their families, communities, or causes. Sleep need not be a passive activity. It can be viewed as an opportunity to align oneself with a sense of purpose, even if only metaphorically. Finally, the Egyptians practiced a communal approach to dreams. Rather than keeping dreams isolated, families would share their dreams, analyze them collectively, and respond to them as a group. In modern society, where individualism often dominates, we can reclaim the communal aspect of dreaming. Sharing dreams with loved ones, discussing recurring themes or symbols, and collectively reflecting on their meaning can create stronger family bonds and help identify shared psychological or environmental factors that might be affecting the household. At the core of all these insights is the fundamental Egyptian understanding that sleep is not nothing, nor is it simply a shutdown of consciousness. Sleep is a journey, a process, and a transformation. It is a daily practice that requires intention, preparation, and respect. By treating sleep with the reverence the Egyptians did, modern people can deepen their relationship with the night, addressing not only their physical needs, but also their psychological, emotional, and spiritual needs. In conclusion, while we may not subscribe to the literal beliefs of ancient Egypt, we can still learn from their approach to sleep and dreams. The insights they left behind suggest that by incorporating intentionality, protection, ritual, and a sense of meaning into our sleep practices, we can improve not just our rest, but our overall well-being. The key lies not in rejecting modern science, but in reconnecting with the wisdom of the past, honoring sleep as an essential sacred process, not just as a biological necessity. This dual understanding of sleep can bring us closer to achieving the kind of restful, meaningful sleep the Egyptians viewed as essential to both daily life and ultimate transformation. The ancient Egyptians answered one of humanity's oldest and most profound questions. What do we do with the mysterious, uncontrollable experience of losing consciousness, entering strange realms and returning, sometimes transformed and sometimes not returning at all? Sleep, that third of our lives when we are unconscious, vulnerable, and often immersed in worlds of dreams, has baffled and fascinated every culture. In modern society, sleep is often reduced to biology, a necessary biological process, an unremarkable shutdown of the body to restore itself. Some traditions brush it aside as mere preparation for the waking world. But for the Egyptians, sleep was not just an absence of awareness or a biological necessity. It was a cosmic, spiritual event, an essential part of existence that connected the individual to the divine and to the ultimate transformations of the universe. What the Egyptians understood, and what modern materialism often misses, is the existential and spiritual weight of sleep. It's not just a time for the body to rest. Sleep is an experience that involves our very identity. It raises profound questions about the nature of consciousness and existence. What happens to my identity when I lose awareness? What becomes of my soul when my body is asleep? What are the dangers, and how can I protect myself during this vulnerable time? What do dreams mean, and how do they connect me to forces beyond my control? And perhaps most critically, what does death feel like, and how can I prepare for it? The Egyptians had a sophisticated system for answering these questions. They created a framework in which sleep was not just a mundane process, but an essential, transformative experience tied directly to the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. Their beliefs about the duat, about the soul's journey through darkness, and about the need for spiritual preparation during sleep, serve to address these profound questions with depth, meaning, and purpose. Whether or not we accept their metaphysical explanations about the duat or the soul's journey, the underlying truth is that the Egyptians treated sleep with reverence, purpose, and intentionality, something modern culture often lacks. In the modern world, we have sacrificed much of this reverence in favor of a clinical, mechanistic view of sleep. We have become disconnected from sleep as a sacred experience, reduced to a biological function to be optimized rather than a journey to be respected. This approach comes with a cost. Treating sleep as just biology creates an alienation from 1/3 of our lives. Sleep is dismissed as noise, dreams are ignored, and the need for preparation or protection is overlooked. We have lost the daily spiritual practice of sleep preparation, the meaningful rituals that could help us protect our consciousness and transform our rest into a cosmic participation. When there is no framework for understanding sleep's mystery, we are left with two extremes: anxiety or dismissiveness. Anxiety arises when we see sleep as something to minimize or control, as an interruption to productivity. Dismissiveness comes when we treat sleep as unimportant, or worse, as a state of nothingness. This is where ancient Egyptian wisdom offers a valuable alternative. The Egyptians didn't shy away from the mystery of sleep. They embraced it, infused it with meaning, and used it as a tool for spiritual growth and cosmic renewal. The Egyptians asked essential human questions. What happens to my identity when I am unconscious? How do I protect myself during this vulnerable time? What is the meaning of my dreams? What does death feel like? And how do I prepare for it? Their answers to these questions were sophisticated and elegant. Sleep was not merely a biological necessity. It was part of the grand cosmic cycle, the journey that every human soul took, and the preparation for the ultimate transformation of death. Through sleep, the Egyptians believed they participated in the daily cosmic renewal, helping to protect and sustain the universe itself. While we may not believe in the literal existence of the duat, or the power of the soul's journey as the Egyptians did, there is a deep psychological and spiritual truth in their approach. They understood that humans require frameworks for navigating the mysteries of consciousness transitions, whether between waking and sleep or life and death. Without such frameworks, individuals often create their own systems, which can be fragmented or less supportive. The Egyptians provided a coherent, powerful cultural system that gave meaning to these transitions and helped individuals prepare for the vulnerability of sleep, the mystery of dreams, and the certainty of death. The Egyptians' ultimate answer to the question of sleep was not that it was nothing, it was not nothingness at all. Instead, they saw sleep as a journey, a cosmic process, a transformative practice. They believed that every time you closed your eyes, you were embarking on a sacred and profound voyage. Whether you came back fully transformed or returned with pieces of yourself scattered, the process was meaningful. They acknowledged the unknowns of the human experience, treating sleep as sacred and worthy of respect, an understanding that allowed them to face the mysteries of life, death, and the afterlife with confidence, reverence, and a sense of cosmic participation. For modern people, perhaps what matters most is not whether the duat exists in the way the Egyptians imagined, but that they treated sleep with sacredness and intentionality, recognized the mystery of consciousness, and connected their lives to larger cosmic patterns. These insights offer a framework for reimagining our own relationship to sleep. Instead of dismissing it, we could choose to treat it as a meaningful, transformative experience, a journey that prepares us for the unknowns of both sleep and death. As we reflect on the ancient Egyptian worldview, we may find that their answer to the question of sleep, you are transformed, you participate in cosmic renewal, you practice for ultimate transformation, and you return to morning light reborn, might not be literally true, but it is truthfully beautiful. In embracing the mystery of sleep, we reclaim a deeper understanding of consciousness, vulnerability, and transformation, insights that might help us live more fully awake in both the waking world and the world of dreams.